The train raced through the morning fog. The boundless southern distance flashed past with a green stripe, interspersed with the blue stripe of the river. "Beautiful," said an elderly man, a neighbor in the compartment, and poured cognac into his tea. "Or would you like tea and bread?" "No, thank you, John Smith. I don't drink alcohol. It makes my hands shake," said Jake. "And I'm a cardiac surgeon. One false move, and that's it. A man could die. So, if you'll excuse me, I'll pass." Jake stared out at the scenery. "I do allow myself the occasional drink." John Smith smiled good-naturedly. "It's a good stress reliever. I'm a lawyer. I've seen a lot of things." He took a sip from his glass of tea and looked at Jake questioningly. "You're from New York, you said, aren't you? Where are you going now?" "On vacation," Jake answered hesitantly. If you could say it was an exile. "Anyway, it's a long story. I'm in no hurry to go anywhere." "So tell me what's going on," John said, and made himself comfortable, intending to pass the time listening to someone else's story. "Well, where to start? Probably with the fact that I was given a condition, either to be investigated and at best get a suspended sentence, which, in fact, does not make it any easier, or go to the middle of nowhere, but with an unblemished reputation and the opportunity to practice medicine. Next, who exiled you? Made you an offer you can't refuse?" "Our chief medical officer to cover up the unpleasant story about the missing narcotic painkillers," Jake explained. "So it wasn't your fault?" John Smith asked. "Of course not," Jake said indignantly and continued, "I was on duty that night. There were a lot of late-night calls, an emergency room. In short, it was a hot night. I had to turn around, keep the nurses moving. In general, I was forced to be on duty more often than others, motivated by the fact that I have higher qualifications and more extensive knowledge. This, of course, was not to my fiancée Ashley's liking. I could understand her, no fiancé, no money. The salary, to put it mildly, doesn't match the qualifications. But the doctor in charge wasn't going to give me any raises. So we got a patient with a gunshot wound to the chest. It's a case right in my specialty, so I'm in the OR, prepping for surgery. And then Kyle, my fellow student and colleague, comes running up. I forgot to sign out for narcotics. I also asked him if it was okay, since I had indicated that I had only spent 2 ampoules of painkillers. He replied that the quantity of drugs in the report matched. So I signed the document purely on trust. I've known each other for so many years. And then it turned out that 1 ampoule was missing. "That's how your friend counted the last of the medicine," said John Smith. "That's on him," Jake said. "That's what I told the head doctor. Only I was the one under suspicion, and I signed it. And Kyle said he hadn't seen anything and didn't know. So there you go." And to keep the story quiet, the chief decided to fire me from the clinic and move me to a no-go village. He didn't want any publicity, especially since our hospital is considered a model hospital. His head would have exploded. Am I the only one who has no idea where the damn ampoule went? I mean, everything was there. "And I'll tell you where," squinted the traveling companion, who began to like this young doctor. "Just tell me. My hearty friend, weren't you afraid that this Kyle of yours was saving up evil for you?" "To be honest, he was," Jake admitted. "At first he was jealous of me, because I'd had an easier time studying to be a doctor. Then he'd taken offense when I'd been assigned to a clinic in the capital. But his rich father had gotten him a job in our department by any means necessary. Again, he did not like and bitter that I was promoted to the head of the department. Or rather, I used to be. And patients were more likely to see me than him." "What are you implying? How old are you?" "Naive, like little children," laughed John Smith. "Now tell me, who's going to be the head of the department now?" "There's no one else but Kyle," Jake answered quickly. He slapped himself on the forehead. "That's it. I didn't realize." John Smith continued, "So you're saying Kyle set me up? Cleared a spot for himself? Maybe. Maybe for something else. We'll have to weigh it all out." He hesitated. "Let's talk. You'll remember something else. Let's see what the landlady put me with. Cookies, ruddy chickens, potatoes, meat and cottage cheese pies. smoked sausage, fresh cucumbers, tomatoes, a muffin, cookies, and a 3-liter jar of compote magically appeared on the table. "Wow," Jake exclaimed. "I'm drooling like it's New Year's Eve." "Well, the laughter started," said John Smith. "There's no telling what the occupation will be like in the town you're going to. It's all a side effect of 30 years of living together with a wife. So go ahead and get a wife," he said with his mouth full. "I'd love to get married, but there's no one to marry." "How come?" wondered the neighbor. "My fiancée left me when I was fired from a prestigious clinic. Said it was out of the way with a loser. And 2 weeks ago we applied for the registry office. Do you know how frustrating that is? For better or for worse, as they say. Why do you need such a wife who will run away at any problem? Anyone can change in wealth. Try to live when there's only bread and water on the table. That's you, my friend. We have a lot of things now, that's why they're coming. We used to live well, but we helped each other. Raised 3 sons, brought up good people. You too will find a kind, brave wife with whom you will go into fire and water together. Look, don't lose her." "Yes, I think you're right. I was worried for nothing," Jake agreed after the men had refreshed themselves. They continued their conversation in the vestibule where John Smith was smoking a pipe. "Say, Jake, did you do anything to provoke this Kyle guy's anger?" he asked, squinting his eyes. It appeared that he was beginning to look like Sherlock Holmes. "Yeah, there was a case," Jake remembered. "I cured a difficult patient of his." "I don't understand your humor. What's wrong with that?" The interlocutor wondered. "What's wrong is that you shook his authority, without thinking of the consequences, interfered too rudely with the course of treatment. Burst in, you might say, saw that the patient is injected with drugs from which he could be paralyzed, and scolded a nurse who had nothing to do with it. I couldn't imagine Kyle being that unprofessional. The nurse messed up. Then I had to apologize to her, and then Kyle didn't forgive me for calling him a mediocre doctor in front of everyone. I mean, really? I should have kept quiet if he wouldn't listen to me any other way." "And what did the head doctor say when you were arguing?" John Smith asked. "Oh no, he took a neutral position," replied Jake. "Then I found out something interesting. It turns out the patient was a very wealthy man. A nurse told me before I left that that rich man already had a will drawn up in favor of his young wife. While he was in the hospital, she went to nightclubs and told everyone that she would soon become a rich widow and then fly to the Maldives. But I completely changed his treatment regimen, and the man got out of the vicious cycle Kyle had him in. You know, it turns out I unwittingly messed up the plans of my wife, who often visited me in the hospital. Guess who?" "Well, already, of course," John Smith replied. No, she hasn't. She was visiting Kyle. That's what my coworkers told me later too," Jake said. "That's where it all went from there. But what else is there to tell? This couple, they say they went to restaurants together," the doctor continued. "That's their business. Don't you think, dear friend, that this is the truest conspiracy of all?" John Smith asked. "And I'd kill to bet that you were the one who was framed for pulling Pokrovsky out of the dead, breaking all the plans of the failed widow Tower and her accomplice. And it was your buddy Kyle who did it." "That can't be right. It never even occurred to me." "It did," Jake replied. Or was he shocked at his compartment mate's conclusion? What had to happen for someone who took an oath to be a doctor to deliberately extinguish the life of someone who'd put his trust in him? That's real murder. What a scoundrel. What now? John Smith sighed. It seems that it can't be undone. There's no turning back the clock. Try to justify yourself in the new place. After all, in the village live people who deserve such a talented doctor like you. Thank you for your kind words. It's important now, Jake Wilson replied gratefully. After that conversation, it was as if a stone had fallen from his soul. He was ready for a new life and was not afraid of change. Early in the morning, the train made a brief stop at the Little Elysi station. It was time to say goodbye to John Smith. Hold on. John Smith gave him a fatherly hug, and I think there are a lot of good people out there. Thanks for the kind words, Jake replied and smiled. Lucky to have met you along the way. What are we going to be long? Let's go. 2 minutes, the conductor shouted. Jake stepped off the train. He turned and waved. Now he was turning over a new leaf. The station was green and bathed in the first rays of sunlight. Jake took a deep breath of the air. It was sweet and scented with flowers. Suddenly he felt happy. As if in an old movie, a young promising doctor comes to the countryside and faces the hardships of life and the intricacies of fate. "Hey," Jake exclaimed at the top of his voice and strode toward the small building with the sign that read Olesia Station. There was a big barn lock on the door, however. Where to go next? He didn't know, and so he sat down on a bench to wait for the ticket booth worker. "Don't wait, you won't," came a voice from somewhere. "It's a day off. It's Saturday." Jake turned around. Behind him stood a small grandfather with a bushy beard, smoking. A cloud of smoke hovered around his head, but it didn't bother the stranger. "Boris, I've never compared anyone from the train to you." "That's funny." "Visitor?" Grandpa asked. "No, just me," Jake answered. "And here's the unfortunate thing. The doctor who was assigned to us from Chicago was upset. It was a waste of a horse, wasn't it?" "Why not? I'll go with you," said Jake. "Well, that's understandable," Grandpa sighed. "I don't ask you. You'll have the tea. What's your last name?" "Wilson," Jake answered, and he felt funny at his grandfather's talk, and smiled. "Was there a doctor coming to see you?" "They say she was kicked out of Chicago for something. So they sent her to us. Our women are afraid to go to her now. They say she'll heal them to death, and they say they won't let them in until they're crying. Maybe it's good that she didn't come. A doctor. But to hell with her. We ain't got no Wilsons." "But we will now," Jake laughed. "Why, grandfather? Is there a paramedic station in your village?" "It doesn't work," said grandfather, "and there's a nurse working in it. What a good girl. She manages to do everything, and milk a cow, and give someone an injection. Our doctors ran away from us. Only our heels were shining. I have no strength," he says. "I immediately galloped to town and got married there. Desperate. You know how I'm called, Grandpa Fedor, so call me Grandpa Fedor." "I see. I'm Jake Wilson. The staff at the hospital called me Jake. So I'm going to be working here with your little sister. What's her middle name? And I don't have a case." "Makarovna." Grandpa Fyodor was taken aback. "So you're our new doctor. You're a woman. That's what. Have the women lied again? I've made a mistake in front of you, Jake. I'm sorry." "That's all right," Jake said. "Now let's go to your hospital to see her right away." Grandpa Fyodor realized, "Come on, let's go home." And the old horse, with its head down, started off easily, pulling a small wagon with 2 riders behind it. Jake had never ridden a cart before, and so he watched curiously and listened to the singing of the forest birds. Gradually, a drowsiness overcame him. "Jake, wake up," Grandfather Fyodor shouted to the horse. And the horse obediently got up. "Wake up, Jake." Here we are. Jake Wilson opened his eyes and was surprised to see a small house with 3 windows. It was the nurse's station of the small town of Upwood. Behind the house was a small vegetable garden. "Here's your work. Here's your home," the old man said in a low voice. "Look who's here. The 2 front doors are for the hospital, and back there are old doors. You'll go to the hut there too." "Thank you, Grandpa," thanked Jake. "How far is the store?" "Do you need to buy some groceries?" "Who buys groceries?" The old man was surprised. "Do they? People have nowhere to put their money. There's a well, as much as you want. Our water is clean, and the store is across the street." "How am I supposed to get in?" Jake asked. "There's a key on the door jamb," said Grandfather John Smith. "And so would your father. I live on that hill over there. What'll it be, Jake?" "All right," said Jake, and went first into the house to put his things away. The doctor's quarters were small. It consisted of 1 room and a small kitchenette with a few simple utensils. There was just enough to live on, and nothing extra. That's how they lived in the village. The news that a young doctor from New York had come to visit them traveled with the speed of light. In half an hour, the locals started coming to the medical station. Some were carrying potatoes, some homemade sausage, some milk and sour cream, some baked goods, or eggs in a basket. Everyone wanted to get acquainted with the new doctor, in whose hands their health and lives would be from this day on. Oh, what a young man was heard from the crowd that gathered behind the fence of the medical station and watched the new doctor wash himself from the hand basin. "Why are you standing in the street?" "Hello." An elderly woman came out ahead of the city. "We have come to say hello to the new man. My name is Granny." "And you, Jake?" Jake wiped his hands with a towel and stared in surprise at the crowd. "Good afternoon. My name is Jake Wilson. I'm a cardiac surgeon. I was sent here from the capital to help you. Come in, be my guests." The women smiled and were pleased with the welcome. They came in and peered into the dwelling. Jake watched and marveled at the way these people went about their business. Some began to make their beds, others scrubbed the floors, and still others stoked the stove and began to cook the chowder in a cast iron, sticking it in the stove. The aroma wafted through the house, making Jake's mouth water. And the chowder was so good that no restaurant could compare. By evening, everyone had gone, leaving Jake alone. Now he could think it was going to be difficult. My mind was racing with thoughts of how much I'd have to learn. I don't even know how to make a stove. What's the point of having one in the city? Although, how am I supposed to cook food? I'll have to buy an electric stove. And in the winter? I'll learn, Jake thought. His thoughts were interrupted by a cautious knock at the door. "Come in, it's open," he said. The door opened, and a pretty girl of about 25 came in. She didn't come empty-handed either, but brought a basket of pies. "Good evening, Dr. Wilson, and I'm Mary, the nurse. Everyone knows me here," she smiled. Jake immediately remembered the words of John Smith's grandfather. "Nice to meet you, Mary. Then we'll work together. Come on in. I'll manage the samovar over tea and conversation." The time passed quickly. It's long gone dark outside the window. "But I've got to go," Mary said. "We've been talking too much. I'll see you on Monday." "Why don't I walk you home?" "It's kind of like this. Who's going to hurt me? Everyone here is a friend," she laughed. "This isn't the city." Jake wanted to go for a walk, so he volunteered to take her home. It was warm outside, smelling of fresh leaves. He felt like he was in a fairy tale world, or even a dream. Jake noticed that Mary was looking at him with a fondness that meant sympathy on her part, but he could offer nothing in return, for his heart still ached at his fiancée's betrayal. For Mary herself, the new doctor was a dream come true. She couldn't find a better match. Besides, he was a handsome, intelligent young man, which also meant a lot. She'd seen how respectful people talked about Jake, and it made her proud. She wanted to be a part of that too, and so a simple plan to marry the doctor to herself as soon as possible had matured in the practical nurse's mind. After Jake saw her off, he stood for a while on the bank of the river that ran nearby. The village was asleep, and only one house had a glimmering light. It was Grandpa Frank's insomnia. Monday morning brought Jake back to reality. Before the sun had even risen, he was awakened by the roosters preparing to go out on his first day of work in the settlement. He heard some grumbling. It turned out there was already a line lined up for the station, which in addition served as a gathering place for gossiping women to scratch their tongues. Upon seeing the doctor in a strict suit, the line suddenly fell into respectful silence. Everyone stared at the new guy. "Good morning," Jake greeted everyone, one at a time. "Hello" came from everywhere. But 10 minutes later, there was a scuffle in the crowd. Somebody wanted to jump the line. He even had to go out and call for order, because no one was going to listen to Mary. It turned out to be a lot of work. The habitual company of teenagers was extremely neglected, and most of them had not had a fluorography for years. In addition, dispensary for a long time no one has not been engaged in. What was the last doctor doing here? Jake resented him. Why is the file cabinet in such bad shape? Mary, you can do whatever you want. But all the data must be entered into an electronic database so that the doctors in the region can see the patient's medical history. Do you understand? Otherwise, we're going to have a fight on our hands. I understand, Jake. Mary smiled. You made me sound like we've been married for 10 years. Well, I'm sorry, Jake said. For some reason, some doctors think that if they work in the countryside, they can be negligent about their work and their patients. and not keep up with the times. I know a lot of well-known experienced doctors who are still studying. So far, they have graduated from various courses and studied new scientific achievements. But don't rural people deserve quality treatment? Worse than urban people? An elderly woman, who was at the reception at that moment, looked at the new specialist with inspiration and absorbed his every word. You know what Elizabeth said in line when she left the office? The new doctor, as for us, ordinary people, hurts with all his soul worries. And he's so young, but he's talking. Oh, how he started to point out our little irregularities, saying that something was wrong, came from the queue. And the villagers were convinced that Jake was the best doctor in the world. And he'd been sent here for the truth. The week flew by, and Jake was fully immersed in his work, not noticing how the cat was changing the evening. The lines were getting shorter, the house calls fewer. It was time to plant gardens, so people's ailments receded into the background. One evening late already, in the door of the house, someone hesitantly knocked. Who's come through the door in this rainstorm? Jake thought grudgingly. But then he remembered that there wasn't a single doctor for 20 kilometers around. So he pulled himself together. It was his profession. He chose it. Jake opened the door. A stranger stood before him, drenched to the skin. She was sobbing. He couldn't tell if she was crying, or if it was the rain streaming down her face onto the floor, carefully woven and presented by Elizabeth's grandmother. The guest stood on the threshold and was silent. The master of the house was silent as well. I am sorry to disturb you at this hour, she began with a trembling voice, but it's a matter of life and death. Jake realized she was crying and motioned for her to come in. Who are you? He asked. My name is Carrie, she said. I came here unnoticed, or they'll gossip. Ours can throw stones, and there is enough shame. Carrie cried again, and Jake handed her a handkerchief. She frantically crumpled it in her hands. Jake realized that this was a serious matter. We're not in the office, so I suggest we talk informally, as friends, Jake said. Okay, Carrie agreed. Jake handed her his robe. I'll go to the kitchen and make some tea, because you're soaking wet. It's still chilly in the house. I didn't heat the stove today. While he was in the kitchen, Carrie rolled up her wet clothes and put on her robe, which of course was too big. She looked comical in Jake's clothes, and he smiled. Here, help yourself. There's cookies and candy and meat pies Grandma Elizabeth baked. And then we'll talk, okay? Carrie nodded and smiled, her pearly teeth showing, a smile that suited her well. Jake watched her absently over his tea. He looked around warily. Do you work somewhere? Jake asked. Yes, I work on a farm as a milkmaid. I actually studied to be a veterinarian. I love animals. I'm waiting for our vet to retire and they'll hire me to take his place. Everything is going so well and you're crying. What's wrong? He said. The thing is, the son of the farmer I work for now cheated me, Carrie said with her head down. He promised to marry me. When I told him I was pregnant, he told me to get rid of the baby and keep quiet. And he's not going to help with the baby and recognize it as his own either, she said dryly. So I'm not going to get rid of the baby, Carrie said. It's just that there's no one else to ask for help. You're kind of the authority figure around here. Why don't you talk to Mike Brown, my baby's father? Maybe he'll listen to you, change his mind. I got a sick mom. That's why I'm working in her place. So I can make a living. And when the baby comes, I'll have to leave the farm. We won't have enough compensation for the three of us. So what do we do? I don't know how I fell for that bastard's tricks. It was like a blur. He's always disgusted me. And now it's as if I've lost my will. And he's never been lovelier, like some kind of intoxication, Jake said thoughtfully. That remains to be seen. So wait, what about your mom? He wondered. Heart's weak, Carrie replied. Constant dizziness, weakness. She was in the hospital in town, but the doctors said they couldn't help her. Prescribed some pills for heart palpitations. They sent her away, and they don't give her disability she can't work. You could lie down and die, Jake said. So tomorrow morning, bring your mother to my office. We'll do a cardiogram, get her looked at, send tests to the city, Jake suggested. With the baby, maybe I can help you if the dad doesn't come to his senses. You gotta fight for your happiness. You understand, don't you? Carrie smiled. I understand. Thanks. I feel better now. It stopped raining and she left, asking not to be escorted out, lest she start gossiping. Jake lived, fighting the stress, went to bed. Needed to build up his strength. It was going to be a tough day. Carrie brought her mom. Linda Johnson was pale and could barely move on her feet. There was no one around this morning, so Jake was able to get a good look at the patient and do the tests that were available to him. When he found out what Carrie's mother had been treated with, he was indignant. The regimen is totally wrong for you, Linda. Is that why you feel so bad? These drugs seem to have been prescribed at random, without the proper tests. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to remove all the medications and stay on bed rest for a week. And I'll prescribe you some drops. They're inexpensive. You take them for now. And when the results come back, I'll prescribe you something else. It's not that bad. We'll see. Maybe you'll be able to go to work soon. It's just the effects of age-related changes. And your body wasn't ready for it. That's why it reacted so violently, Jake explained. Mother and daughter looked at each other. They both had tears in their eyes. You could see how worried and anguished they had been all this time over some medical malpractice that had nearly driven a nearly healthy woman to her grave.
Doctor, yes, next to you. I even feel better somehow, Linda exclaimed. I was really going to die. Her tears streamed from her eyes. Carrie looked at her mom and burst into tears. She hadn't told her mom she was pregnant yet, afraid of giving her a heart attack. I realized this and decided to help. So that's it then, he declared. In 6 months, you can safely work as a milkmaid or a nurse and there and babysit a grandson. The time will come. What do you mean, a grandchild? Rounded Linda's eyes. Mom, I'm pregnant with Mike Brown's baby, and he doesn't want one. Carrie lowered her head. Her mother's face frowned, but then suddenly brightened. Well, screw him. I'll be on my feet soon enough. We'll raise a granddaughter someday. All thanks to our golden man, Jake Wilson. If your father were alive, he'd give that Brown guy a hard time, Linda said through her tears, winking off into the distance. Carrie came out without a limp. It was like she'd been given a new lease on life. That's what moral support means, Jake said. It's important to patients. I don't know how to thank you. I shook Carrie's hand. I was so scared for my mom, and I was scared she'd find out about my situation. It's embarrassing. I'm not married, and now that she's cheered me up so much, I can't be bothered. Oh, how nice of you to come to us. Carrie gave Jake a big hug out of sheer exuberance. He could feel her heart beating. Something fleeting, tender touched his soul. It was like falling in love. And even though this girl was nothing like his sophisticated ex-fiancée, she doesn't play the piano or wear beautiful clothes. But in all of that, you can see her bright soul. I don't expect anything in return. When Carrie was leaving, or I was still watching for a long time, if he didn't understand, Mike, how could you offend such an angel? Farmer Brown's house was a real mansion. When I walked into the backyard, I saw that the owner's family had servants in addition. It was all in the style of a manor house. Some women and men either carrying something or washing and cleaning. So rich, I thought truthfully. Linda Johnson said on the steps of the mansion sat a young, full-bodied man with sideburns, Mike Brown with the same hair and the same eyebrows. His small eyes were watching the laborers. He looked more like an angry pig. Afternoon. Is that you, Mike? Jake asked. I'll take care of you, doctor. His eyes jumped before he showed up. We don't have any sick people. I'm here about Carrie's situation. She said you got her pregnant. She wants to keep the baby, and it turns out you're against it. What's the matter? You can't handle your own baby. That's none of your business, doctor. Mike stood up to his full height, revealing a decent beer belly. Not really my thing. If she's pregnant, I'm the only doctor in the area. So you don't recognize the baby, too. Jake didn't want to deal with that unscrupulous bastard anymore. Right off the bat, Mike chuckled. Vaughn would be happy to marry me with the kind of money our family has. It's a dream come true for them. We're not talking about marriage now, but about responsibility for the baby, Jake said. Will you admit paternity? No, I've already said it. Whoever she complains to is the one who's going to feed her now. Okay, Jake said. He turned and walked away. He realized he had nothing more to say to this man. Lunch was coming to an end, and he hurried to the nurse's station. It was Children's Day, so there were moms and babies gathered in the hallway. Mary was already hard at work, weighing, measuring height, and handing out preventive immunization handouts to moms. "Well done, Mary. You're doing a great job." Jake praised the nurse. Why were her cheeks flushed? Scarlet? She looked coquettishly at the doctor and smiled at him as if she had the face of a mature beauty. The Marys in the line were whispering about her and Jake's relationship, and there was a need to spread the rumor that the new doctor in town and the local nurse weren't just colleagues. Jake Wilson didn't notice the intrigues and love nets that the girl was carefully setting up. He plunged headlong into his work. In the evening, when he stoked the stove and cooked soup himself according to the recipe of a local resident, Carrie came to visit him. "I'm sorry I didn't knock," she said, and cried. "What's wrong with you and Mom? Is something bothering you?" Jake asked. "I got fired." Sobs. "Carrie came to the farm today. And Mike told me and Mom not to go in their barn. I got my paychecks, my workbook. How are we going to live now?" "All right, you'll live." "You can't stop crying." Jake started to calm her down. "Everything's going to be all right. That bastard Brown can't wait to humiliate you. I've been needing a custodian and a cleaner for a long time. That's 2 full-time jobs. I think you and Linda Johnson are good enough. We'll get you signed up tomorrow. While your mom can't work, I'll give her sick leave. You'll do the cleaning for her, and I'll help out, of course. Mary's been working too hard. Those nurses work too hard at their jobs." Carrie stopped crying, wiped her tears, and smiled radiantly. "Really? Are you going to help us? Are we going to have everything like people?" "Of course," Jake confirmed. "Don't forget to bring your mom to the reception." In front of you, Carrie ran out of the room. She couldn't wait to tell her mother the good news. She was elated. That's how simple words of encouragement and a little help can lift a fallen person. Jake Wilson knew this well because he was a good. What can't be said about Mike Brown, who, upon learning that Jake had helped Carrie's family, held a grudge against him. The treatment Jake prescribed for Carrie's mom, according to research, worked great. After 2 months, she was able to get off sick leave and work at the nursing station with her daughter. As Carrie's belly grew, the hopes of the township matchmakers to marry her dwindled by the day. Mary saw from the sidelines how tenderly Jake looked at Carrie, and his feelings were mutual. Linda Johnson surrounded the doctor with care, gratitude, and simply because this John Smith, as she called him behind her eyes, was to her liking. Soon, everyone in the township found out that Carrie was pregnant, but they didn't know by whom. Everyone who knew about it was silent as a partisan. So the local women wondered who the mysterious father was. Rarely any decent girl gets involved with anyone, reasoned one of them, standing in the village. "Then why doesn't she marry?" "AI?" questioned another. "Is it the doctor's fault?" asked an old woman. This aroused the anger of the crowd. "What are you talking about, Semyonovna? The doctor is a good fellow. He wouldn't dishonor a girl. And look, with your chicken mind, she's got a lot of time on her hands. And Jake Wilson came here only 3 months ago," explained the forester's wife. "And it's true," said Semyonovna. "I almost gave the fellow a bad name. Then he's married." "That's right," Zana concluded. Everyone fell silent at once. Each of them had a husband or a son-in-law. The silence was broken by the forester's wife. "Here you aren't, stupid garden head. You're having second thoughts again. Carrie wouldn't get involved with just anyone. It's someone who tricked her, who messed her up. I guess they did. If I find out who, I'll break his windows. It's becoming a fashion for him to hurt orphans. I was my father Ivan's friend once. We must help the girl." The next day, the women from the village came to Carrie's house and moved what they could. Some brought a crib in which all the children had grown up, some a high chair, some a children's table, and some clothes for the babies. They even brought a tricycle and a soccer ball. That really touched Linda Johnson. It turned out to be a whole holiday with songs and sitting till night. Autumn crept up unnoticed. While harvesting carrots in the vegetable garden, Carrie went into labor. She was rushed to a nearby maternity hospital in the district center. Carrie gave birth to a baby boy, whom she named after her father, Alexander. "Daddy, here's your baby boy," the midwife said as she brought him out for discharge. "He's just like his father, your baby. He looks just like him." Jake looked back at Linda Johnson, who was blushing like a beet. The two of them had come to pick up Carrie together. They'd mistaken him for the baby's father. "Thank you," Jake said, and held out his hands to take the envelope. Little Alexander showed, with a loud cry, that he was no stranger to the world. It wasn't until Carrie got the doctor's note and held his son in her arms that he calmed down. "That's quite a voice," Jake smiled. "He'll probably be an opera singer." Linda Johnson couldn't get enough of her grandson. She took the baby from Carrie, who was still weak and holding the package. "I'm afraid he'll tear up and sing," she said quietly. "I have a proposition for you," Jake said to Carrie. "Why don't you and I register? I'm suggesting it because we like each other, and the most important thing is Alexander's well-being. He can have his father's last name like everyone else." "But it's not your child," Carrie said, surprised. "Wouldn't you regret it? I've liked you for a long time, but I don't want to ruin your life." "No one's saying you're going to ruin my life," Jake said. "Well, do you agree?" "I do," Carrie said shortly. Sobs came from behind them. It was Linda Johnson. The long months of worrying about her daughter were finally over. She was happy, and maybe even happier than the future couple. Like the registry office, they were signed quickly, without delay. And now no one in the village doubted that Alexander was Jake's son. Just born prematurely, that was the rumor among the locals. The newlyweds didn't deny or confirm anything, but just smiled, enjoying their happiness. Everyone was invited to the party to celebrate the creation of a new family. The tables were set right on the meadow. Mix, the warm woman's fall, still allowed to celebrate until morning. The only two who didn't show up were Mary and Mike. Envy of other people's happiness blinded their eyes. What did drunk Mike say as he passed Mary's house? "Your Jake didn't marry you," he sneered. "I needed my pretty girl, you see." "He's my boy too," Mary said. "He didn't leave me for nothing." "Why didn't you marry me then?" "I wanted to." "What if I'd yelled? Then Jake and I had a good chance." "He's just a fool." Mary wouldn't stop. "Don't scold me," Mike snapped at her. I have a plan for revenge. You want to help? Well," and he fell down on the grass with his mouth shut. 3 days later, a prosecutor's audit came to Ciara. "I was shocked when I found out what Jake was accused of." "We've received a signal that you, Dr. Wilson, are taking bribes from patients," the investigator said. "Please open the safe." Carrie obligingly handed over the keys. When Jake opened the safe, he found a wad of money. Mary secretly rejoiced, for she had put it there at Mike's request, carefully erasing the fingerprints. All the bills were marked with the word bribe, which showed up under a special lamp. "It's not mine," Jake said in shock. "Then whose is it?" the investigator asked. "You were in charge of the safe, and we know about your history with the missing painkillers. That's why you were sent here. What do you—" "I didn't take anything then either," Jake said. "That's what they all say," the investigator grinned. "Shall we make an arrest?" Jake was taken to the city and put in the detention center. Carrie went to see him with packages and told him that no one in the village believed he was guilty. People raised money for a lawyer, but he didn't help either. The court found Jake guilty of bribery, taking into account the past missing drugs. He was eventually sentenced to 4 years. It all happened so fast, they didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. Jake was shipped 1,000 kilometers from home, and Carrie was left with her mother and baby in her arms. The general security colony in Magadan was considered exemplary, but only on paper. When Jake entered the cell, he immediately realized that he would not be allowed to serve a normal sentence here. No sooner had the iron door closed behind him than a small, nasty-looking convict jumped up to Jake. "What kind of bird has flown in?" He chuckled, showing his toothless mouth. Jake silently put his things down on the empty bunk and sat staring at a single point. "They don't teach you how to say hello," another convict said loudly, cleaning something at the table. "Hello, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm very tired after the long trip," Jake replied. "There are rules you can't break," said an older man in an expensive tracksuit that made him stand out from the rest of the prisoners. Everyone was quiet when he spoke. "I don't know the rules yet, so I'll have to learn," Jake said. "Unfortunately, you should have learned sooner." "Now, I'm sorry, the locals have taken offense," the man in the suit said. "I'll start over. My name is Jake. What's yours?" There was laughter in the cell, and someone in the corner whistled. "It's not proper to ask such questions of newcomers here," the man said with restraint. And then the doctor realized that he was the chief of the colony, so he kept silent. "You can see the doctor right away," commented the toothless man. "Will he live with us or will he go to his grave by himself?" "I don't know anything," Jake said tiredly. He was fast asleep. When he woke up, he found all his things scattered and lying around. "Now go get your stuff, doctor." The red-haired, squint-eyed man hopped around him like a monkey. Everybody laughed. "Whoever scattered my stuff, let him collect it," Jake said, squirming inwardly, but not letting on. He sat down at the table, where crumbs lay on the table, as the convicts prepared for breakfast. Just as Jake sat down, 3 prisoners approached him. One clamped his mouth shut, and 2 of them tried to pinch his arms. "Let's throw him in the toilet," the toothless one yelled frantically. Jake managed to grab a spoon from the table. The military training he hadn't missed at the university was making itself felt. With a swift movement, he threw the redhead over his hip. Then he kicked the toothless one under the breath. He hit the toothless one so hard that he collapsed near the restroom, next to a third man, a large, clumsy man who appeared to be the authority's security guard. Jake grabbed the ambo's throat from behind and put the handle of a spoon to it. "Listen, suit, call your handlers," Jake shouted. "I'm a surgeon, and I can cut this boar up like this. Are you going to barbecue or ask for more?" "So pour tea with the doctor," the leader said calmly. "Let's get acquainted." "The Pakan forbade it," the toothless one moaned. "Let him go for his insolence. He spooned us." "I'll let," quietly answered the older man and narrowed his eyes like a snake. The toothless one poked and crawled away under his bunk. The other prisoner was already pouring tea. Sausage, chocolate candies, and a fruit roll appeared on the table like a tablecloth. "Sit down, surgeon. Let's get acquainted," the authority figure said in a tone that brooked no objection. Jake let go of the ambo, who had a trickle of blood running down his neck, and sat down next to the gray-haired man. There was a murmur, but the gray-haired man raised his hand, and everyone fell silent. "I had a name too, but here they call me Gray." "I call you Surgeon Jake. I'll give up my bunk. The terrorist will sleep across from me now." Some stone-faced man silently gathered up his belongings, rolled up the mattress, and left to take Jake's place. "Your stuff my guys will make up for," Gray said. "We've got doctors sitting here. Tell me, surgeon, how did you get here?" Jake told his whole life, and the men who had robbery and murder to their credit listened with their mouths open. That night, the gray-haired man began to feel sick. He collapsed from the bench, clutching his heart. Jake reacted quickly as the nearest cardiologist was several dozen miles away, and he was entrusted to treat the authority figure. The next day, the gray-haired man was better. Since then, Jake had a life of luxury in prison. He became the authority figure's right-hand man, and Carrie waited and hoped for the best. Linda Johnson had 2 jobs and was the breadwinner for their family. Ashley thanked fate that she had gotten back on her feet in time and cursed the farmer's son for what he had done to Mary. Mary, on the other hand, had quit her job and moved to the city, hiding from the wrath of the people. But trouble doesn't come alone. Little Kyle got sick. His heart was too weak. "Does your son need surgery?" "Not now, but in the near future," said the pediatric cardiologist. "And not every specialist will do it." "So what do we do?" Carrie pleaded. "I'll put Kyle on maintenance therapy, but the drugs would be expensive," the doctor said. When Carrie found out how much the drugs cost, she burst into tears. She'd never seen money like that before. God. Linda Johnson splashed her hands when her daughter told her what the doctor had said and that there was no one to help us. "Jake's in jail." And that evening, the state prison called. "We regret to inform you, Mrs. Wilson, that your husband, Jake Wilson, has been killed in a logging camp. He was crushed to death by a log." "We're sorry for your loss," the other end of the line said, and hung up. Carrie felt the ground slipping from under her feet. The light faded in her eyes. No sooner had she been a wife than she was a widow. Linda Johnson was especially grieving. Jake was like a son to her. The rumor that Carrie's son was seriously ill and her husband had died in prison reached Mike Brown. One night there was a knock on the door of Carrie's house. Mike stood on the doorstep, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'm not made of stone either," he said. "I know people grumble at me saying I need more. I don't have to live on nothing. Come into my house and I'll recognize you as Wilson. I'll help you with your treatment. Why don't you say something? Think about it. You'll pay your debts. If you live with me, I'll give you money for your medicine. And if you don't, I'm sorry." Mike left, and Carrie cried all night. She didn't want anything to do with the hated farmer's son, but the child's life was more precious. "Daughter, don't go. People will help and cure Kyle," her mother begged her. "We can't get that much money, and he's rich." "Let them help cure their grandson," Carrie said. "Nothing comes easy. I'm sorry, Mom, but I agree. I can't bring Jake back anyway. At least it'll save my son." Linda Johnson was silent. There was only one person who didn't believe in death, and that was Mary. She filed a request on behalf of Carrie's wife, where she learned that it wasn't him who had died, but his full namesake and his insidious jealousy. A plan matured. She wrote a letter to Jake, telling him in color that his wife had gone to live with Mike, and she kept quiet about her son's illness. "Why are you being so quiet?" the gray-haired man asked Jake, who was holding the unfortunate letter. "Time shall I have to go home?" Jake answered briefly and showed Mary's letter to the boss. "Well, that's the way it should be," the gray-haired man replied. "In 3 days, there will be an escape. You can go with them, and I'll cover you. And if they catch you, they'll bring you back to my cell." "I'll make a deal," the gray-haired man assured him. Jake lay awake. He wondered how Carrie could do this to him. The convicts were running at night. The gray man had it all figured out. A freight train loaded with food arrived right on schedule. Some man was waiting for them. He helped them get into the carriage, which was equipped for 4 people. How much it cost the 7th, we could only guess. But in 3 days, the fugitives, led by Jake, were in his village. "Let's rob a store," the redhead suggested. "We'll just kill the clerk, or she'll give us away." "We won't kill anybody, and we won't rob anybody," Jake objected. "Go on your way. I'm going home." But the convicts wouldn't listen. It was their old habits to enter the store at lunchtime, not to scare Zoya, the saleswoman, to death. But they didn't have time to hurt her. "Run!" Jake shouted, and he rushed at the bandits, 2 of whom he managed to disarm, but the 3rd crept up behind him and hit him on the head. If it hadn't been for the men Zoya had brought with her, Jake would have died. "Look, Jake's alive," shouting all around. Carrie ran to the screams, but she didn't get to see her beloved. One thing made her heart glad that Jake was alive, but she was ashamed of him and of people. The thought of the sick child, however, kept her from leaving Mike Brown. As the gray-haired man had said, Jake was returned to the colony, who would be in the cell, but not only did they not add time for escape, but after a year they released him on parole for good behavior. "For me," said the gray-haired man in parting, Jake was finally free and breathing the fresh summer air. When he got back to town, the first thing he did was go to the truck stop. "What are you doing here? Don't mess with us. We'll get out of here. I'm selling the farm. How are you going to leave? You have my wife and son." Jake pushed Mike away and headed toward the house. "Let's go home. It's not your fault." When Carrie saw Jake, she grabbed her son and ran out of the house like she was barefoot. He hugged them, and then he turned around and punched Mike Brown in the face. He fell and couldn't get up for a long time, and Linda Johnson came running toward them. "Jake, you're back." "Oh, Carrie, I was held hostage by that asshole. Sashinka's sick. His heart's weak." Jake looked at Carrie. She said, "I lived like a servant. I didn't cheat on you, I believe you," Jake said. "Let's go home." And outside Carrie's house, the whole village had gathered. People were coming, carrying treats, congratulating Jake on his return. Jake's arrival party was a village-wide celebration. A week later, Notary John Smith arrived. "I've come to transfer Mike Brown's former farm to you." "How's that?" Jake didn't understand. "It's being given to you." "By whom?" "Vladimir Pokrovsky. Remember him? You saved him in New York when you worked at the clinic? By the way, Kyle, who set you up with the missing drugs, is serving time for trafficking in illegal substances, and your grandfather is the handiwork of the same Pokrovsky. So take possession of the farm." "Sure," Jake smiled. And 6 months later, his enterprise was one of the most profitable in the region. The workers on it were making decent wages. Carrie became the head veterinarian, and the whole farm was skillfully managed by Linda Johnson. Sasha was operated on in the best clinic in the capital, and he ran with all the children and no longer choked. Jake succeeded in getting a full-fledged hospital with a hospital and a maternity ward built in the village. Jake Wilson became a hero to the entire female population. The older men called him our Jake. They always guarded the welfare of his family. Mike Brown and Mary, who had returned from the city, were dishonorably banished from the township. In addition, Mike was tried for using illegal drugs. Carrie, on the other hand, was always by Jake's side. One day, Carrie suddenly became dizzy. Jake barely had time to pick her up and was very frightened. "We need to go to the hospital right away," he said. Carrie smiled. "It'll pass. Don't be scared." When Jake asked fearfully, 9 months later, she whispered in his ear, "We're going to have another baby." And time went on in a new way for Jake. On her wedding day, the bride received an unexpected call, barely taking a note out of the groom's pocket. "Ciara, I'm telling you, stop messing with my son's head," screamed a woman in her 60s in the small kitchen. It seemed that her shout was heard throughout the entire Khrushchevka. "I don't want anything for him. It's his choice. Your son is a grown man, and he should know better who to associate his life with," Ciara said. "Remember, baby," the woman whispered sharply and leaned closer to Ciara. "Eugene will never commit to someone like you." "What kind of girl?" Ciara asked. "The poor, deceitful one." "Cunning," the woman whispered. "I am not a trickster," the girl replied quietly. Anyone else in her place would have either thrown a temper tantrum or cried. But Ciara kept her composure. She was ready for this conversation. For months now she had been harassed by her mother-in-law Amelie, an overbearing lady who loved her son Eugene very much. Eugene, a modest young man of 28, had chosen a poor girl from the suburbs as his bride. Ciara did not notify her mother. Amelie learned of Ciara's existence by chance when she once again tried to match her son with a neighbor's daughter. In fact, Amelie's neighbor in the cottage village was an official from the region, with whom she had been on long friendly terms since her student days. Amelie herself also became not the last person in the region. Together with her husband Stephen, she founded a considerable company and was still actively engaged in business. Stephen was the complete opposite of his wife, a modest businessman who never meddled in his son's personal life. He was always quietly engaged in his business. Only sometimes he wondered how Eugene was doing. He himself thought the idea of having to marry a bureaucrat's daughter was wild. He believed that marriages of convenience were a thing of the past. Moreover, in spite of Amelie's peculiar character and her ability to make connections with the right people, they conducted their business honestly, and a family alliance with an influential family wouldn't be good for business. So Amelie's motivation was based solely on her outdated notions of nobility and honorable marriages. But realizing the absurdity of the situation did nothing to help Stephen's influence on his wife. Just like Eugene, he was in a subordinate position to Amelie and almost never argued with her. Stephen's friends and relatives at first wondered how such different people could get along together. But apparently this was the secret of their marital happiness. Fervent temperament, Amelie extinguished rational, modest Stephen. She gave their relationship energy, and he processed it and directed in the right direction. But if the elder Stephen was able to find himself next to such a wife, their son Eugene experienced a variety of difficulties during his growing up, and, as it turned out, in the period of quite independent life. The events that took place in Eugene's childhood and adolescence are not of any interest and will cause rather a sense of embarrassment and shame for overprotective Amelie. But Eugene's character went to his father and was sympathetic to his mother's temperament. Moreover, over time, the situation improved. For example, Amelie did not interfere with her son's idea to move to a rented apartment on his own money. Although initially she planned that Eugene will live in their huge family cottage, which will be inherited by him. After moving in, Eugene was even excited had his mother realized that he had long since become an adult. But one thing made him doubt it. About once a month, Amelie unobtrusively hinted to Eugene about the neighbor's unmarried daughter. Eugene kindly dismissed it, saying she wasn't his type. He was in no hurry to start a family. Then one day he met Ciara, a girl from a working-class family who had lost her father early. She worked as a consultant in a clothing store that Eugene often visited. It wasn't in the center of town, and it didn't sell high-end clothes. Eugene didn't need the glitz. He always wore what he was comfortable with. The cheapness of the clothing store where Ciara worked not only shows Eugene's modesty, but also that she didn't fall in love with him for his money. The workers of the store realized that their customers are mostly not the richest people. That's why, when they first started talking and Ciara didn't know about Eugene's parents, she perceived him as an ordinary, modest guy. It was only later that Eugene told her that he worked for his parents' large company. Ciara was even a little embarrassed at first,
but Eugene did his best not to show the difference in their financial situation. As their relationship progressed, the X-hour grew closer and closer. Sooner or later, Eugene needed to tell his mom about Ciara coming into his life. He tried to delay the moment as long as possible, but one day he let it slip. That afternoon, Amelie tried again to hint to her son about the neighbor's marriage. "Eugene, please listen to me one more time. You're not a little boy anymore. Maybe it's time you started thinking about your own family." "Mom, let me put it this way. If I'm not a little boy anymore, can I decide when and with whom I should start a family?" "Well, you know how worried I am about you. I don't want you to be used by some girl who's going to see you for your wallet. I know you want what's best for me, but look at me. Is it written on my forehead that I come from a rich family? You have nobility written all over your forehead, son. Give up your nobility. Please, this is the 21st century, not the 19th. What's the century got to do with it? I just don't want you to feel bad about it. Clara's not an option, Mom. But we've talked about it so many times, she's not my type. How much do you know about your own tastes?" "I do." Eugene was starting to get a little annoyed, but then he pulled himself together. "How? Would you say you know who your real taste is?" "You'd be surprised, but I do." Eugene hadn't intended to talk about Ciara on this particular day, but he figured it was the right time. "What?" Amelie was surprised. "Did you find a girl?" "I did. A long time ago, almost 6 months now." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Me? I was afraid of your reaction." "Well, what can I say? You were right to be afraid, weren't you? Who is she? Where did she come from?" Eugene started trying to come up with a better description. "She works in the retail and service industry." "I see." A saleswoman, Amelie said, and pretended to feel sick. "Mom, what are you doing?" Eugene ran to get some water and handed the glass to his mom. "I don't understand your reaction. Who are her parents?" "I don't really know. Dad's dead, I think. Mom works in a factory or something." "You know how to surprise me. What's the difference? Why do you think people who weren't born with a golden spoon in their mouth are second class?" "You're probably too young to realize that. You just can't explain it. You're living in your barbarian stereotypes. Everyone's laughing at you." "What are you talking about?" "Eugene, I'm a laughingstock." "Well, Mom." Eugene thought he was overreacting. "That's not what I meant. I just think it would be better if you reconsidered and accepted Ciara. I'm not taking anyone anywhere. Since you're such an adult, you can live your own life. Don't you even want to meet her?" "No," Amelie said, but she looked her son in the eye. "You know, it's better if I see for myself who she is. You'll get the naughty one." "That's good. You'll like her." After that conversation, Eugene's joy was short-lived. After a while, he had some disturbing thoughts. What if his mother had agreed to meet Ciara, not because she wanted to get in touch, but to personally persuade Ciara to break up with him? Amelie was capable of that. Eugene's fears were not in vain. From their first meeting, Amelie had tried to show Ciara where she belonged. Eugene had urged his mother to hold back, and she had partially kept her promise. In front of her son, she played the role of the quiet, calm mother, the future mother-in-law. But as soon as Ciara and Amelie were alone together, the fight would begin. It didn't happen very often. Usually the heated conversation took place over the phone. The first time Amelie called Ciara was the morning after they first met. "Ciara, is that you?" "Yes, who's calling?" "You have a bad memory for voices. It's Amelie." "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. It's just the noise outside. But I'm coming home now." "Wait, don't be in a hurry to go home. I don't want Eugene to know about this conversation." Ciara instantly tensed up. "Listen to me carefully. You're not a bad girl at first glance. But remember, I am a predator. I can see through your intentions, and I sense that you are in fact a mercantile shepherdess, and I would hate to see you anywhere near my son again. Amelie, why are you doing this? I really love your son. Come on, tell me your fairy tales. You've got the wrong girl. I'm asking you nicely to leave my son alone. I'm not bothering him. We have mutual feelings for each other, and I'm not going to break up with Eugene because of your whims. Oh, so that's how it is. Well, I'm going to make your life a lot of fun. What do you mean? You'll find out. And don't let Eugene find out about this conversation. Ciara, of course, was out of her mind. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't, because then Eugene would suspect something. He'd end up fighting with his mother. And Ciara didn't want to cause any discord between Eugene and Amelie. So they lived like that for a few months. Once every 2 weeks, Amelie would pester Ciara with her talk and threats. But it must be said, nothing went beyond threats. Ciara wondered what Amelie could theoretically come up with to break up her and Eugene start a rumor about a mistress. Someone could frame her. Just in case, Ciara began to behave more carefully, avoided possible casual acquaintances, closed all pages in social networks. In such a state of siege, Ciara's nervous system suffered significantly. But apparently it gave its fruits. In her relationship with Eugene, they were in perfect harmony, and she never got any action from Amelie. Sometimes Ciara wondered if Eugene suspected something. One couldn't be so naive as not to see the maximum heat in the relationship between the girl she loved and her mother. But Eugene was not only modest, but also an impossibly simple man. It was easy enough with him to pretend that everything was fine. He believed it, or just really wanted to believe it. Ciara decided that such naivety would be good for her. Her plan was to just hold out until the wedding. And then Amelie would have no choice but to accept it. And everything went according to her plan. Calls from her potential mother-in-law became much less frequent, and their tone was no longer so categorical. Finally, Eugene proposed to Ciara. Everything happened the classic way: the restaurant, the champagne, the ring. Ciara was absolutely happy. She thought she'd won everything, but she didn't. The proposal was a wake-up call for Amelie. Apparently, the woman had decided she had no chance of ending the relationship, so she went into overdrive. Then Amelie personally went to her son's rented apartment where Eugene and Ciara lived. She deliberately waited until her son was at work to be alone with Ciara. That night they had a conversation in which Amelie called Ciara a fraud. You're a fraud yourself. You've been leading naive Eugene around by the nose. Well, you think you got what you wanted, don't you? There's not going to be a wedding. You can't stop Eugene and I from being happy, Amelie. No, I won't. Amelie just grinned back. She was about to leave when the door opened and Eugene came in. Oh, Mom, hi. What are you doing here? I stopped by to check on the newlyweds. Amelie's acting skills were just fine. Without blinking an eye, she switched from the character of Hera to that of a caring mother-in-law. That's so wonderful, rejoiced naive Eugene, unsuspecting. Eugene, listen, Ciara began to say. There's something I want to tell you. Yes, that's right, son. Ciara and I have been thinking about the best way to have a wedding. Amelie interrupted her. She realized that her potential daughter-in-law was about to snap and tell Eugene about her problem. What are you thinking? Eugene asked. No, I wanted to talk about something else, Ciara continued. I think the wedding should be canceled. There was an oppressive silence. Amelie was as surprised by Ciara's statement as Eugene was. She really thought Ciara was going to complain about her, but apparently she'd managed to squeeze her rival after all. What? Eugene interjected. Did I hear that? No, you didn't hear that. I don't think I'm ready to get married yet. Mom, did you say something to her? Eugene asked irritably. No, I didn't. What does this have to do with me? Amelie shook her head in a negative way, pretending not to understand. Then, Ciara, please explain what's going on. I've decided that we are very different people. I have no place in your circle. What circle? Eugene was puzzled. You're still feeling Mom's influence, aren't you? Look, there is no my circle. It's just you and me in a circle. a two-person circle. We both fit into it perfectly. No, 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 please, at least let me go. I need a pause. Ciara quickly packed her things and left. She ran down the wet sidewalks that hadn't had time to dry from the recent rain. Yes, what Ciara had so feared for the past few months had happened, a violent, hysterical, and uncompromising breakdown. For too long she had tolerated it, feared it, kept it to herself. Just before she left, she wondered if she should say it all to Amelie's face, in front of Eugene. But then it would be a cruel blow to Eugene in the first place. Ciara decided not to upset the tight-knit family. If anything, Eugene would find many more interesting girls. He would not remain lonely, but Ciara was not ready to endure Amelie's attacks for the rest of her life. She realized that the wedding is not a panacea, and a stamp in the passport may not affect the behavior of her mother-in-law. That's why Ciara decided to take such a desperate step. In 20 minutes, she ran to her apartment, entered it, and lay on the couch with her face in the pillow. Her mom had gone to the country during the summer months, so the apartment was empty. Ciara lay on the couch and thought about nothing. She couldn't even cry, there was no strength left for tears. After lying like that for a while, Ciara got up, took a sedative, and went outside again. Just lying there idly, she couldn't do it either. Ciara was in a state where she didn't know what she wanted. But it was necessary to be active. That's when people do stupid things, sometimes the most irreparable. Who knows how that day would have ended for Ciara if a black SUV hadn't honked at her on the way out of the driveway. She turned around, looked at the driver, then at the license plates, and sighed in relief. It was Eugene's father, Stephen's car. Ciara took her time getting into the front seat. "Hello, Stephen," she said quietly. Ciara had only seen Eugene's father twice in her life. He had never visited them himself, and when Eugene invited Ciara to their family cottage, Stephen was usually working. "But hello, Ciara," he said and drove forward. "Where are we going?" "To your place," Ciara asked fearfully. "No, you what?" "I'm not sending you there. We're going to a nice place. I think we have a lot to talk about." "Okay." Ciara thought it was Eugene who had asked her father to talk to her and bring her back to him. At first she had feared that Stephen would think of nothing better to do than just take her back to the house where the scandals with Amelie would begin again. But as it turned out, Eugene's dad decided to do something more subtle. He took her to a small cafe called Lavender in the center of town. Ciara and Stephen chose a table and ordered. "I love this place," Stephen began to talk while waiting for their order. "Not Amelie's style at all. We usually prefer other places, but you know what I mean? I come here when I want to be alone or to talk to someone about personal matters. The atmosphere is good, not flashy." "Yes, it's very cozy here," Ciara answered and stared. "You probably think it was Eugene who asked me to talk to you, don't you?" "No, it's my own improvisation," Stephen cut to the chase. "I called Amelie about an hour ago on a work-related matter, and she told me about your escape, and I realized I couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. You see, I've always thought that grown-ups can sort out their own relationships. You think so too, don't you?" "I do," Ciara said. Yes, that's right." Stephen didn't let Ciara finish. "But when another powerful person interferes in an adult relationship and, moreover, destroys it, a third person is needed to balance the situation. So I thought I'd be that third person for a while." "Thank you." "There's nothing to thank me for. I really want you to go back to Eugene. Is that what you want? I don't want Eugene's relationship with his mom to go south. It's not that important right now. Amelie aside, would you be willing to go back to Eugene?" "Of course I would." "That's a good answer. Now let's think about what's stopping you from doing that. More precisely, who's stopping you from doing it?" Stephen asked. "Of course you hate to hear Amelie say anything she tells you. I understand that perfectly well. But understand, take a detached view of her. She's not going to do anything bad to you in terms of actual actions, and with time she'll get used to it, and then she'll love it. I know her psychology well." "I too thought at first that Amelie would temper her ardor," Ciara said. "For a moment I thought that was what was really happening. But as soon as Eugene proposed to me, it started all over again, treating it like a final battle. She decided to concentrate all her resources and pour the maximum out on me. "She'll calm down after the wedding," Stephen said confidently. "In fact, I'm almost certain that she'll change her attitude toward you much sooner." "I don't know," Ciara said hesitantly, "but right now she's glad I'm gone. And imagine me coming back. What would her reaction be? I mean, she could do anything." "I understand your concerns. So here's what we're going to do. I'll have a serious talk with her, try to moderate her temper, and generally intervene every time she gets on your nerves. Just text me, that's all. I'll call her right away. Okay? But I'll have to bother you every time." Ciara hesitated. "Don't worry about that. I'm interested in solving this situation myself." Stephen leaned over and whispered, "I never liked those Joneses and their golden daughter." Ciara grinned, knowing full well of Amelie's intentions to marry Eugene off to the neighbor's daughter. "And since that's the case, of course I'll let you know. But let's wait at least 24 hours. I'll call Eugene tomorrow, okay?" Stephen asked for the bill and paid it. "Okay, Ciara, I gotta go. Where do you want to ride?" Go. I'll just sit here for a while." Stephen said goodbye to Ciara and left the cafe. Ciara, alone with her tea. She finally had some hope in the last day. Was there really one normal person in Eugene's family who understood how to solve her problem? No, Ciara thought Eugene was normal too. Eugene was too indecisive and naive, and she wanted to keep him away from conflicts with his mother as much as possible. And Stephen had offered his own help. So Ciara shouldn't have worried about his relationship with his wife. Since he had gone to the meeting first, he knew what he was doing. Ciara's musings were interrupted by a tense conversation at a neighboring table. A customer and a waiter were having an argument. "I'm sorry, but your card doesn't fit," the waiter said kindly but sternly. "What do you mean it doesn't fit? Try again," the customer answered fearfully. "I have tried 3 times. It doesn't fit." "So, then, your machine does not work." "The machine is fine. The other cards are accepted." "But wait, what am I supposed to do? I don't have any cash." "Try a wire transfer." "If I could, I'd offer it myself." "I don't have internet on my phone either. You're putting me in an impossible position." "I'm sorry, but according to regulations, we have to call the police in such cases." "What's 500 rubles? "The police? Are you kidding me?" "Absolutely not. That's the rules. But let me give you my passport as collateral or my cell phone, and I'll go get the cash." "I'm sorry, but that's not allowed." Ciara rarely allowed herself to eavesdrop on other people's conversations. But here the scene was unfolding too close to her, and she became a listener willy-nilly. Moreover, at one point in the argument with the waiter, the customer's voice seemed very familiar to her. Or rather, not the voice, but the intonation so slightly theatrical. Ciara tried to remember where she could have heard those intonations, but nothing came to mind. So she gave in to curiosity and turned around to face the conflicted table. One glance at the customer was enough. Her classmate Noah Salvador's card wasn't working. Ciara didn't wait for the waiter to start calling the police. She got up and walked over to a neighboring table. "Wait, don't call the police," she said quietly to the waiter. "I'm paying for the young man's order." "What?" Salvador didn't immediately realize what was going on. He frantically looked for numbers in the phone book, choosing whom to ask to transfer the money. He didn't even notice that his classmate had come to the table. Then Noah looked up and saw Ciara. "Ciara, where did you happen to be here from?" Ciara smiled back and put her card to the machine. The classmates decided to leave this ill-fated cafe as soon as possible. "Listen, I don't even know how to thank you," Noah said, walking along the sidewalk with Ciara. "Come on, we're not strangers after all. You better tell me how you live." "I live boring. I work as a junior engineer at our chemical plant." "And you?" "I'm not far off either. I sell clothes." "You see how much hope they had in us at school? It's all nonsense. You can't tell at school who you can and can't get your hopes up for. And you and I weren't great. let's face it. Well, you're right about the curriculum, Noah grinned. Noah grinned. We weren't the only ones who paid attention to us in the curriculum, unlike the other one. Salvador immediately understood the meaning of Ciara's clarification. The fact was that Noah for Ciara and Ciara for Noah 15 years ago had become the first high school sweethearts. The whole class had watched their relationship develop, but developed was too loud a word. From the outside, it seemed more like the relationship was standing still and not moving anywhere. Noah and Ciara knew how they felt about each other, but they did nothing about it. They were very timid. No matter how much their classmates tried to push them towards each other, no way. For a whole year, the relationship was in limbo, until Ciara changed school for family reasons. After that, he and Noah saw each other only a few times at reunions, and Salvador even tried to start some kind of communication with Ciara, but that didn't lead to anything. On a personal level, we certainly shone with our indecision. Noah corrected his former classmate. The whole class laughed at us, not laughed at us, but envied us. Oh, of course they were jealous, Ciara smiled. But I think I've changed during this time. I've become much more determined. With girls and how? Any luck? Married? No, just practicing for now. But I mean only very quick relationships so far. You didn't get married either? Not yet. But hopefully there will be a wedding very soon. Until a couple hours ago I doubted it, but things seem to be getting better now. You're not 5 minutes away from being wife, Noah said a little sadly and looked at Ciara. She remembered that look from high school. It seemed to her as if those 15 years didn't even exist for Salvador. Still the same 8th grade. He still feels something for Ciara. And she tells him she's getting married soon. If that were the case, Noah would have the exact same look. Yeah, if everything goes well, of course. Is there any reason to doubt it? But, there are certain circumstances. You don't trust your future husband? No, that has nothing to do with it. Okay, well, I'm just being honest. I'm sorry it was an unnecessary question. Even your number. Do you think that's a good idea? Ciara asked, perplexed. No, you must have misunderstood me. I'd like to wire you the money for the cafe. You paid for me. Oh, forget it. But it would be a real inconvenience. Okay, I'll let you know. Ciara gave her number to Noah. They said their goodbyes and left. Ciara went to her house. She didn't want to go back to Eugene yet. Why she needed that extra 24 hours to think about it, she didn't understand. But something was keeping her from returning soon. Probably the deep trauma Amelie was systematically inflicting. If individually the attacks of a potential mother-in-law could be tolerated and forgotten, then altogether they accumulated into one big psychological trauma. Tonight's quarrel was the last straw. So for at least a night she needed to sleep alone to recover from the incident. The only thing that surprised her a little was the phone was silent. Still, Ciara had thought that Eugene would start calling her immediately after she left. But he didn't. Even on messengers, there wasn't a single message from Eugene, despite the difficult situation. His natural restraint found a way to show itself. However, Ciara was able to find an excuse for this inaction as well. She decided that at first Eugene just didn't want to get under Ciara's hot hand and thought it was better to wait until she cooled down a bit. And then he had simply gotten a call from Stephen, informing him of Ciara's decision to return tomorrow and asking him not to bother her for that 24 hours. With those thoughts, Ciara calmed down and finalized her decision to come back tomorrow. Everything turned out just as Ciara had envisioned, even a little better. The next morning, Eugene called her himself, apologized for the past incident, and asked her to come back. Ciara immediately did just that. Throughout the wedding preparations, to Ciara's delight, Amelie had not made any contact at all. They occasionally called Eugene, but even in those private conversations they didn't seem to mention Ciara. Apparently Stephen had managed to do some serious work with her. Ciara was quietly happy about it and was busy with the wedding arrangements. She was embarrassed to remember that she could have deprived herself of such happiness by simply running away from Eugene. It was a good thing that the wise Stephen had gotten there in time. There was no telling how things would have turned out if he had not, with his usual calmness and prudence, taken up the matter. The wedding was 1 day away, Ciara's most nervous moment of preparation. The phone rang. She didn't pick it up right away. The problems associated with the ill-fitting dress seemed much more important to her. But soon the phone rang again, and she did pick it up. Amelie popped up on the screen in large letters. Ciara sighed heavily and took the call. "Hello, Ciara, hello," Amelie asked in a voice that wasn't her usual one. She usually managed to give out even her greeting words in a particularly unpleasant tone, but this time the tone was calm and even a bit timid. "Yes, Amelie, hello. I'd like to talk to you, but please don't be frightened. It's not what you think." Amelie felt exactly Ciara's first reaction to her call. "I'd like to talk." All the previous conversations flashed before Ciara's eyes, and for a moment she had time to think that it would start all over again, but if it wasn't going to be the same as always. No. I told you it's not what you think. I promise I won't say a bad word to you. I just really want to talk to you. I think it's better to do it before the wedding. If that's the way you feel, where do you want to meet? Or maybe we could do it over the phone. It wouldn't be over the phone. I'd like to meet at a coffee shop downtown. It's called Lavender. I'll call you a cab. No, that's okay. I know where it is. I don't need a cab. I'll be there in an hour. Okay, then I'll be there in an hour. Ciara was extremely surprised. It was the first time she'd ever heard Amelie's calm voice. And where was she being called to? To the same place where Stephen had brought her back to normal earlier. It's a coincidence, isn't it? After all, he usually held his family dinners in nice, fancy restaurants, and they had chosen the same modest establishment for their moments of privacy. I wonder if they realize it themselves. An hour later, Ciara was at the place. Amelie was running a little late. Ciara chose the same table where she and Stephen were sitting and waited. Literally 5 minutes later, Amelie walked into the room. "Oh, Ciara, you picked my favorite table," she said cheerfully and sat down across from me. "This must be where you and Stephen usually relax, right?" Ciara asked, as if she wanted to check her hunch. "No, we usually vacation in more solid places, you know. And here I like to come alone, and I don't think he knows about it," Amelie answered. "Wow," Ciara said in surprise. She didn't know what surprised her the most. On the one hand, it was strange to hear that Amelie preferred a modest place for privacy. Ciara had always thought the main thing about their pairing was Amelie and her love of local pathos. But here, talking about the more respectable places, she made a face as if she was sick of all those expensive restaurants and was only thinking how she could escape to some humble cafeteria. On the other hand, the coincidence with Stephen seemed even more surprising to Ciara. She had a thought that it was her husband who had told Amelie about the conversation they had had, and that was the reason for the choice of location for tonight's meeting. But as it turned out, it was really a coincidence. I guess the years together have something to do with taste and preferences in non-obvious things. "You must be a little surprised," Amelie said, as if reading Ciara's mind. "You must have thought that I'm just a pretentious aunt who cares more about the price tag than anything else in the world. But no, sometimes I want to be modest. You see, lately I've been thinking more and more about how bored I am with everything. Many years ago I invented the image of a rich diva. In fact, it was never her. Still understand, a girl from a poor family, from a deep province, suddenly finds herself in the circle of golden youth. Anyone's head will be blown off by talk of good perfume and travel to Paris. And as a result, a bouquet of complexes in addition. Stephen has always been sympathetic to this, only sometimes expressing his dislike of what is going on. Though he should love all this agility and bohemia much more than I do. He's one of those golden youths. And I thought that since I had become a Salvador, I had to live up to it. That's how you can rework this text. The outfits, the house, the restaurants, I got used to it all over time. But it wasn't just about material possessions. No, I wanted my loved ones to meet certain standards too. And of course, the most important person to me was Eugene. I felt it was my duty to find the best things in life for him. And what does the best mean in my distorted view? The richest and most expensive, of course. And here, just the daughter of the neighbors grew up, but literally everything worked out perfectly. Only thing is, our Eugene took after his father. I'm such an idiot. I should have taken after Stephen. But no, I had to satisfy my need for pathos. Oh, come on, why would you do that? Ciara felt sorry for Amelie. She never thought she could feel pity for this man. But once Amelie had shared a little of her revelations, everything changed at once. No, don't feel sorry for me, Amelie said. You have every right to hate me. I just want you to understand the nature of my initial attitude toward you. All those complexes and rich prejudices were very repulsive. When Eugene told you, all my ideas of right living collapsed in an instant. The deep complexes that prevented me from accepting you turned into outright boorishness. Although in fact many years ago I was in the same position as you. Or maybe, Amelie wondered, there's nothing wrong with me? Ciara asked. I was just thinking, maybe I was trying to save you. I'm sorry. What do you mean? Well, I just didn't want you to make the same mistakes I made subconsciously. You have the same potential to pick up those same complexes and become a petty woman like me. Although I'm not looking for excuses. You're completely different and will never, thankfully, become like me. No, you're absolutely right, Ciara said. I too have been and continue to be uncomfortable with wealth. And maybe if you hadn't decided to tell your story, it would have happened all over again, Ciara said. It's good that you realize that. I don't know if you forgive me for all these cruel conversations we've had. I don't think I could forgive myself. In fact, if I were you, I'd run away or give Eugene an ultimatum. It was either me or your mom. I had that thought, Ciara grinned. But I thought it was too harsh. By the way, how did Stephen's mom take you in? Amelie turned to the window and stared out for 15 seconds. Let's just say it wasn't the best experience I can give you, she finally said. Stephen's mom was a bossy woman, like me, only unlike me. She'd been rich all her life. I don't know how the Salvador family managed to make a good fortune during the Soviet era. Stephen's father was a prominent party figure, but that wasn't a guarantee of success back then. Anyway, it doesn't matter how. But Stephen's parents lived much richer than the average Soviet citizen. It really surprised me, Amelie continued. I used to walk around their apartment and dacha with my mouth open, imagining how I would have foreign clothes and real French perfume. You probably wouldn't understand that now. There is everything from every country on the shelves. You can buy it all you want. It is there, but not everyone can buy it, Ciara corrected. And the quality is not always original. So there is a choice, of course, but not everyone can use this choice. Well, you see, again this vacuum of rich life appears, said Amelie. Apparently in my world everyone can buy everything. I guess that's okay. You don't have to know all the realities. Yes, I do, Ciara argued. Sometimes that ignorance can lead to the most unpleasant consequences, like you lashing out at me. Okay, let's get back to your question, Amelie said. As you've probably guessed by now, Stephen's mother didn't accept me either. Only she never said so openly. Then how did you know she didn't accept you? Ciara asked. You know, it happens when you walk into a house and you feel with every fiber of your being that you're hated, Amelie said. People don't have to express their hatred out loud. It's just a look, an intonation, something like that. Moreover, at some point Stephen stopped calling me to his house, trying to make sure that his mother and I never crossed paths. His parents didn't even come to our wedding, she continued. Stephen said they had some very important things to do. But I knew right away. They never accepted me into their family. Stephen's mom had passed away pretty early in life, and we never got a chance to explain ourselves. On the other hand, you didn't fight with her, did you? Ciara tried to reassure me. Yes, she never raised her voice at me, Amelie replied. But, you know, sometimes it's better to have all your emotions confronted in person than to have them stored somewhere deep inside. I think that her early departure may have something to do with the fact that she kept it all to herself, never let her emotions out. But who knows? Maybe I was just making it up as I went along. Are you blaming yourself for your mother-in-law's early death? Ciara wondered. No, I don't blame myself, but I think I caused her a lot of distress. Most importantly, hidden distress. She was just very fond of Stephen, so she didn't want to talk about it openly. And I must have been a bad mother to act so rudely. In the end, you made the right choice, Ciara said. We were able to have a human conversation after all. Explain ourselves. It's a lot better than keeping it to yourself. You did better than Stephen's mom? But what could I have driven you to? Amelie sighed. But it's all right. You didn't drive me to anything. I'm not the weakest of characters, you know. I've been hurt by your barbs, of course, Ciara said. But it's all right, I put up with it. Except for the last time. And then I did the wrong thing. I should have acted right away, told Eugene and Stephen. I told you I didn't want to upset your relationship with Eugene, so I kept quiet, she continued. And about Stephen, I hardly knew him. Before that unexpected conversation, as it turned out, I hardly knew him either. No, I mean, I knew he was a good psychologist, but not that good. He'd built a solid business from scratch. I was involved, of course, but more as a doer, just doing what he told me to do. Didn't you say that Stephen was one of the golden youth? Ciara asked. Yes, he was. Amelie nodded. But what kind of business in the Soviet Union? He created his own companies, his own. And not like many people back then, he bought a factory for cheap and started to cut money from it. He rented premises, bought equipment, all by himself, with initial capital. Maybe he had it easier than others, of course. But nobody gave him $1 million. His father took the collapse of the Union hard, so he was skeptical of Stephen's idea to create his own enterprise. Almost didn't help. Is that what I'm getting at? Amelie took a sip of coffee. Entrepreneurs, businessmen are a special breed. Oh, I've seen a lot of them over the years. Some of them make me sick. Some bad, some good. But they all have something in common: grit, speed, toughness. But if you look at Stephen from the outside, there's none of that. Not even just from the outside. At home, he's a harmless man who I would never trust to run a big company. I'm much more of an entrepreneur than he is, by the way. Amelie smiled. But no. After all, the company has risen, and in the most difficult time for the country. Not just raised, but developed and successfully managed it to this day. How, you may ask, how can one be a successful entrepreneur with such a character? I did not immediately begin to think about it. You see, when you live with a person for many years, you don't notice their characteristic features, Amelie continued. You take everything as normal. But at every meeting with entrepreneurs, at every business lunch, I felt uncomfortable. I just didn't like those rich guys. But with my Stephen, it was always so nice, so relaxed. That's when I started to notice that he was different from the usual entrepreneurs. I forgot about it for a while. Different, so what I thought. That's why I married him and not someone else. But with each new meeting, with each new acquaintance, eccentric businessman, I thought again about Stephen's character. And then the truth finally began to dawn on me. Stephen has some kind of psychological skill that helps him solve all business problems. Amelie paused, taking a sip of coffee. At first, it seemed to me that this is only a small part of the success of his company. After all, I was in charge of a lot of the negotiations. But as time went on, I realized that Stephen's silent, modest participation was a much bigger part of our success than my loud and flashy negotiations. Like a spider, he quietly weaves his web, graciously invites his competitors, partners, and subordinates into his web, envelops them, and then does whatever he wants with them, Amelie said emotionally. Somehow he manages to find weaknesses, pain points, or just the most important thing in some issue. Stephen quietly presses on these points and gets the desired result. I thought at the time that he only did that in business. In life, he's quieter than water, lower than grass. He's unpretentious, he doesn't demand anything. He just doesn't need to show his psychological skills. But that's not the case. It was only in the last month that I realized that he had been using those skills throughout our life together. It's just that Stephen did it so neatly that I didn't notice. And anyway, I guess he was okay with my hot temper. That's why he wasn't very active in fixing our relationship. After all, marriage is not a business. There are other processes at work, Amelie said. How did you notice it in the end? What happened? In the last month, something that had never happened in your entire life together. You happened, she grinned. But Eugene and I started our relationship much earlier. Yes, but Stephen had stayed out of it all this time. And then he decided to clean up the mess. That's when I realized. Why did Stephen decide to interfere? Ciara wondered. Oh, I don't know. It's so unlike him. Usually he's separate and Eugene's personal life is separate. I think the answer is obvious, Amelie shrugged. He just felt sorry for you. Realized you were suffering because of me. He waited and waited, and at the most decisive moment he acted like that. What did he do besides talk to me? He had 2 conversations with me, calmly, without raising his voice. He carefully explained everything. After that, my worldview completely changed. I have never worked with psychologists, but I think people experience something similar after a long therapy with professional psychologists. He brought me back down to earth and explained what I looked like from the outside. And in 2 conversations, Stephen managed to change your personality? Ciara asked incredulously, as you can see, only not quite like that. Amelie shook her head. He didn't change my personality. Stephen helped me to shed the tinsel that hung over my real identity, those awful rich man complexes and prejudices. She took a sip of coffee. The first conversation happened after you ran away. I don't know what clicked with him, but that evening of that day, Stephen sat down with me and bluntly told me he wanted to talk. He told me how he'd talked to you, what a positive girl you really are. And then he started asking simple leading questions, the answers to which made me realize how stupid it was to act like that. After that, I decided to give you a break, no calling, no texting, avoiding seeing you. I thought that you hated me and would not agree to even a normal, calm conversation, such as we have now. And last night we had a second conversation. He reminded me about our personal history, about my relationship with his mother. Amelie continued. Yesterday I finally realized how wrong I was about you. And I decided that we should end this ridiculous feud before the wedding, and as openly as possible. Explaining to you everything that I realized about myself not so long ago. I hope I've done that. And I hope even more that you'll forgive me. She looked at Ciara. Of course I will, she nodded. You are a very strong man. Only strong people are able to change so dramatically in such a short time and at the same time, looking in the eyes, apologize. Strong people don't torture their fiancé for such a long time. Amelie waved her hand. Did you have a reason to do it? Well then, let's put it behind us, Ciara said. Although the last thing I really don't want is for you to repeat my mistakes. The most important thing in a marriage, in any marriage, and especially when it comes to any financial matters, is to stay yourself. Yeah, thanks for the warning. I more than understood. Amelie nodded. Good for you. Well, I won't keep you any longer. Get ready for tomorrow, for the great happiness that will come. Ciara said goodbye to Amelie and left the cafe. Outside it was going to rain again. The people of the city were not lucky with the weather this summer. Ciara hailed a cab, sat in the back seat and leaned against the window, thinking. The cab driver, seeing the pensive expression on her face, did not distract her with conversation, put on some quiet radio station and silently drove Ciara home. Ciara really had a lot to think about. It seemed like she should have been driving in bewilderment at the conversation that had taken place. After all, how was it possible that Eugene's mother, who had been driving her for over a year, turned out to be not only a subtle and sensitive person, but also found the strength to apologize and explain everything to Ciara? But it wasn't the sudden transformation of roles and attitudes towards her mom that she was thinking about. She felt like she'd just been chatting with a friend she'd known for years. Absolutely the same feelings. Ciara trusted Amelie completely, didn't doubt the sincerity of her every word. Everything was so ordinary, so peaceful, that she forgot all the hardships this woman had put her through. Someone had erased all the negativity from her memories of Amelie. And now Ciara was just driving and enjoying the moment. She didn't even have to think about tomorrow's wedding. She was already happy. I'm sorry, you're so thoughtful. The cab driver broke the silence. Is something important coming up? Yes, you're very clever, Ciara smiled. Something important indeed. Well, what could be important for a young, beautiful girl? A wedding, a divorce. Still a wedding, she nodded. Oh, today I'm especially perceptive. The cab driver praised himself. Are you a little nervous? That's right. It's better to be nervous beforehand, so that there won't be any problems later. He began to tell an incredibly interesting story of his life, which Ciara stopped listening to at the second sentence. It wasn't until the end of the story that she came to her senses. So you should always be on your guard, the cab driver warned emotionally. Always, especially before a wedding. There will always be those who want to upset her. So girl, I hope that you will not repeat my mistakes and will not trust everyone at once. We're here now, by the way. The car was indeed pulling into the courtyard of Eugene and Ciara's house. After paying the driver, she went up to the house. Eugene was gone, so Ciara was once again alone with her thoughts. She couldn't remember what the shrewd cab driver had been talking about, but his last words crashed into her head. Maybe she really was in a hurry to trust Amelie. What if this was some last-ditch multi-pronged scheme on the part of her future mother-in-law? Or rather, if her scheme succeeded, she would never become a mother-in-law. Ciara said to herself, "Stop. Why am I so nervous? Some cab driver said something stupid and I believed it right away. No, you need to calm down and ignore all sorts of insignificant things. It was all nerves." Ciara shamed herself and continued to prepare for the wedding. Tomorrow needed to be planned once more. She and Eugene decided to do away with hackneyed traditions, like the groom not seeing the bride before the wedding in her dress and other classic superstitions. They decided to go to the registry office together and then modestly go to celebrate in a restaurant. They did not want a lot of guests, only Ciara's parents, Eugene's mom, a few friends and girlfriends. It seemed that there should not be any difficulties with the organization. The only thing was that Ciara was worried whether she would have time to go to the beauty salon before the registry office. But there much depended on the speed of the master, not on her. The next day, Ciara went to the salon even earlier than she had planned. She called the master in advance and clarified whether there was free time. Ciara had been to this salon literally several times in her life. Usually she solved her appearance by herself. She did her hair, manicure and pedicure with her own hands. At first she just didn't have money for all these masters, and then, even when Eugene and she had the opportunity to go anywhere, the habit of doing everything herself remained. And it must be said, Ciara was pretty good at it. So there was no need for beauty salons. But the wedding was a special day, and Ciara decided to trust the hands of a master. They chose a hairstyle together, and the girl began to work on her hair. Ciara watched her hands carefully, ready to stop in time, for example, if she wanted to cut off too much hair. After a couple minutes, she calmed down a bit, relaxed, and stopped this total control. Ciara decided that the master knew his business and there was no need to keep glaring at her. But it wasn't long before she had to tense up again. The phone rang in her pocket. At first, she didn't want to pick up the phone, not wanting to interrupt the master's work process. All the more reason for her to have the call on silent. The ringing stopped. Ciara had time to exhale, but then the phone rang again. "If anything, you can answer it. It won't interfere with our work," said the girl master kindly, who, as it turned out, also heard those quiet calls. "Okay," Ciara replied, pulling her phone out of her pocket and taking the call. "Hello, speaking." "Ciara, good afternoon." A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. It sounded as if it had been changed on purpose in a computer program. "Who is this?" Ciara asked without saying hello. She immediately sensed something wrong. "It's, shall we say, a well-wisher." "Who? I don't understand." "A well-wisher. I want you to have a good life. Stop this circus. Identify yourself immediately." "Calm down, Ciara. There's no need to be angry. My job is to help you. So please listen to me and don't hang up on me. It's for your own happiness." "I know what I need for my own happiness. If you're not going to introduce yourself, I'm hanging up. Have a nice day." Ciara thought she'd gotten a scam call and was about to hang up. "Wait, it's about your wedding," shouted the man into the phone, and it worked. Ciara didn't bother to press the reset button. "Speak then?" Only clearly, quickly, and without idiotic mystery. "Okay, I'll be as direct as possible. You need to cancel the wedding immediately because the man you want to marry is not who he says he is." "What the hell are you talking about? Who the hell are you?" "I can't reveal my identity yet because it would be worse for both of us. Eugene is a traitor and a cheater. He's been living a double life and lying to you for years. So stop it right now." "On what grounds am I supposed to believe you?" "On any basis." I'm telling the truth. And tonight, if you don't cancel the wedding, you'll see it for yourself. Eugene will cheat on you during the ceremony. Look, that's ridiculous. It's not even funny. Couldn't you think of anything more plausible? Well, don't believe me, but you're going to regret it today. Right now, canceling the wedding is still within your power. Right now, you can avoid tomorrow's embarrassment and prevent the rest of your life from being traumatized. Please believe me. How do you even envision this? I have to cancel my wedding because some scammer called me and talked trash about my fiancé. But it's still your choice. Yeah, it sounds risky, but trust me, it's worth it. I mean, it's going to be late tonight. You can't wash away the shame. You have a few hours to think about it. I warned you. That's it. I can't hear it anymore. Goodbye. Ciara ended the call and threw the phone in front of the mirror. She looked at the girl master. She calmly continued working, pretending nothing was happening. But it was clear from her eyes that she was a little shocked at what was happening. Ciara urgently needed someone to share her impressions of the call with, so she was the first to speak. I don't understand how this is even possible. A stranger calls, introduces himself to me and tries to upset my wedding. But what the hell is that? So no mood will remain. Don't worry, the master reassured Ciara. The closer an important event is, the more unnecessary problems will arise. Maybe it was a secret admirer called you, who does not want you to marry. Or, for example, the former revenge. Come on, how could I have secret admirers? And anyway, do you know how many years ago my previous relationship ended? I think all the exes have long since forgotten me. I mean, maybe some scammers will call again, demanding money to make the wedding a success. Maybe they're scammers, although I've never heard of such elaborate schemes. Okay, let's see. The master finished her work and Ciara drove home. In the cab, she was still as pensive as yesterday. Only this time the cab driver was able to keep silent for the rest of the ride. Ciara thought about that mysterious phone call. She carefully chased one thought away, but it came back again and again. It was the thought of Amelie's involvement in the call. Hadn't it all been part of her big plan yesterday? To put her guard down, to draw suspicion away from herself, and then set this nonsense in motion today. There was no reason for Ciara to really suspect Amelie. She forced herself to believe it was just her prejudices and nothing more. For one thing, the scheme was too complicated. Amelie could come up with something much simpler and more axe-headed. She doesn't need to hire people, bust up a comedy act in a cafe to issue an ultimatum, or have a tough face-to-face talk with Ciara. And secondly, Amelie was already very convincing yesterday. Ciara had worked in sales for a long time, and was good at recognizing when a person was faking it, and when they really, for example, liked a certain thing. Amelie, of course, is not a jacket buyer. But the principle is the same. Yesterday, when she talked about moments from her youth, about Stephen's mom, she had real tears in her eyes. Yes, she was able to hold them back. But Ciara saw those tears. So Amelie's fake version of the story seemed pretty wild to her. The cab driver drove her home quickly. Ciara arrived with plenty of time to spare. Eugene had just woken up. His mood was good. "You look gorgeous," he said to Ciara as he looked at her new hairstyle. "Thank you," the bride thanked Eugene and hugged him. She hugged him silently for a few minutes. "Is everything okay, Ciara?" Eugene asked, looking at Ciara's silence. Yes, everything is fine," she answered him in an unsure tone. "Are you worried about the wedding?" Eugene was not convinced by Ciara's words. "A little. Probably more than I should be, though. I know I'm nervous, too. I mean, we're advanced people, you and me. It's just a few drops of ink on a passport. Why should we worry about it? We should just think of the wedding as a celebration. Enjoy it." "You make a good point," Ciara said and sighed. "What's wrong with you?" Eugene hugged his fiancée even tighter. "Are you sure it's just the wedding that's bothering you? Nothing else has happened?" "How's Mom?" "Nothing," Ciara answered. "I had a heart-to-heart talk with her last night." "She didn't call again?" "No, I don't mean my mom, I mean yours." "How is she? Does she have time to come to the wedding from the village? How's she doing?" Mine's fine. She'll make it. She was wondering how you're doing. Unlike Amelie, Ciara's mom took to Eugene immediately. She didn't have a problem with her future son-in-law. She trusted her daughter's choice. Well, that's good. So everyone will be together today, for the first time since we've been together. Or is that what you're worried about? You could say that Ciara answered, not quite lying to Eugene. She was of course more worried about the call, but Ciara wasn't forgetting about her mom's upcoming meeting with Amelie either. There was no telling how it might end. Her mom was a simple woman. She might say something to Amelie if she started to show her temper. She could only hope that Amelie's transformation from yesterday would spread to the wedding festivities and everything would go quietly and calmly. Ciara was sure of her mother she would never provoke a conflict, but she could react. I think everything will be fine. People are adults, they understand everything. Dad will be there if anything happens. He'll keep an eye on everyone, won't he? Eugene grinned, hinting at his mom's complicated nature. Yeah, that's comforting. Stephen's presence really did give Ciara a guarantee of a quiet evening. The man had recently demonstrated exceptional wisdom and ability to resolve difficult conflicts. Okay, as long as we're all good. What's wrong? Why do you have such a sad look on your face, Eugene? Ciara stared intently into her fiancé's eyes. Tell me honestly, you're not going to leave me for anyone, are you? What's the matter, Ciara? No, I'm not. Eugene was a little taken aback by the unexpected question from Ciara. And in the whole time we've been together, you haven't cheated on me with anyone? She asked. I haven't, Eugene answered. Listen, I'm a little scared by your questions. What's wrong? Nothing. Ciara hugged Eugene again. If you're so faithful, nothing happened. Everything's fine. They sat like that until they left for the registry office. Ciara had the thought of telling Eugene about the call, but she didn't dare to do it. It looked too stupid from the outside, and not just from the outside. Ciara herself thought the situation was as stupid as possible. Telling Eugene would only spoil his mood. And at a wedding there should be at least one person with a festive mood. Moreover, even if she made the most unrealistic assumption and thought that the man calling wasn't lying and that Eugene was really the last scoundrel, he would never admit it, and will deny it anyway. So initiating Eugene into the mysterious caller seemed to Ciara from all sides a wrong decision. She thought the best thing to do right now would be to forget about the call. Yes, it wouldn't be possible to completely get rid of the intrusive thoughts. One way or another, the subject would come up for her during the celebration. But at least try worth, especially right at the wedding. And it will turn out to finally make sure that this call is a fiction of some fraudsters. After all, according to their claims, Eugene was supposed to cheat at the wedding. That seemed to her the most delusional of all the information she'd gotten from John Doe. At a wedding, the groom is almost always in the public eye. Why would he cheat right there? Even if Eugene was a pathological cheater, why wouldn't he wait a bit? And how would the caller know that? Anyway, the more Ciara thought about the call, the more she found it absurd. And she calmed down. The long-awaited hour of the trip to the registry office came. There everything went modestly, tastefully, and without incident. Ciara and Eugene were solemnly declared husband and wife, and now they were on their way to the restaurant to celebrate the wedding. The newlyweds didn't bother with too much pomp and order limousines to the venue. They were driven by Stephen and Amelie to the restaurant. Ciara went into the ladies' room with her already established mother-in-law. Ciara, congratulations again, and I apologize, Amelie said kindly. You are now officially part of our extended family. Thank you, Ciara replied just as kindly. There is no need to apologize. A new page in our relationship has begun. Who remembers the old, you know? Wise beyond her years, Ciara. Amelie noted and went out into the hall. Ciara was left with a little makeup touch-up. During the whole event at the registry office and on the way to the restaurant, she never once remembered about the mysterious phone call. Now, the conversation with Amelie reminded Ciara of her unfounded suspicions about her mother-in-law. Now she was completely convinced that Amelie had nothing to do with it. What did she care anyway? Ciara also went out into the hall and took her place next to the groom. The celebration went on quietly. Ciara's mom quickly found common language with Amelie, and now they were sitting together and discussing the children. The first hour of the celebration passed, then the second. The waiters only had time to bring new bottles of wine and strong drinks. Despite the high degree of fun, there were no conflicts. The news of the wedding had reached the more distant relatives of Ciara and Eugene. You bet, because Ciara posted the wedding photo in one of the social networks. After that, the unexpected calls from various friends of the past began. Ciara and Eugene's 3 siblings had to leave the table outside or into quiet areas of the restaurant to be able to hear the caller. At some point, Ciara got tired of this and sat with the phone right at the table. Just then, Eugene got another call and went somewhere from behind the table. A minute later, the phone rang at Ciara's desk as well. She picked it up, saw another unspecified number, and pressed accept the call. "Hello, Ciara, did you recognize me? Is it hard to hear?" A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. "Who is this?" "I called you this morning and warned you about something." "Oh, you again," Ciara sobered up. "What do you want?" "I don't need anything anymore. All I could do was warn you. Didn't you listen? Now all you have to do is reap the consequences of your mistakes." "Cut the crap." Ciara left the table and went to a quieter corner. "Can you be traced by your phone number? Do you even know about that?" "Oh, Ciara, you're a naive girl," the stranger grinned. "And to make sure that I'm not lying, you only need to put your hand in the pocket of your husband's jacket. Anyway, you know everything. Call me, please, on this number. Have a good day." The man hung up. Ciara turned around and slowly walked to the table. Eugene still hadn't returned. As luck would have it, he had gone out to talk in just his shirt and left his jacket hanging on the chair. Ciara reluctantly sat down in her seat, looked around, and carefully slipped her hand into Eugene's jacket pocket. There she fumbled for some paper. The girl looked around again and pulled it out. The paper was neatly folded several times and smelled of perfume. Ciara put her hands under the table and unfolded the note, trying to keep a nonchalant expression on her face. The note had only a few words written on it in good handwriting: 07000 in the small banquet room. Waiting. Ciara looked at her watch. It showed 6:55. She wasn't quite sure what was even going on. It all seemed like some kind of idiotic prank. Maybe someone really decided to play a prank on me. Ciara soothed herself. But Eugene knows how much I don't like pranks. Oh, I don't like it. Ciara got up from the table and walked around the room. She knew this restaurant had 2 banquet rooms. The note was probably referring to just the second, smaller banquet room. Ciara didn't immediately decide to head there. It still felt very much like some kind of joke. Maybe she shouldn't fall for it then. But on the other hand, if someone with a dubious sense of humor decided to play a prank on the wedding, why not play along with Eugene? Ciara still had hope that she just wouldn't find that small banquet hall. But no, her gaze traitorously stopped just outside the small banquet hall sign. She glanced at her watch once more. It took her about 5 minutes to think about it. Then Ciara carefully opened the door and peered inside. The room was in disrepair, with chairs on the tables and decorations lying on the floor. Toward one of those decorations, some girl, most likely a waitress, was clinging passionately to her newfound husband. Ciara went numb. That's it. That's enough," Eugene quietly muttered, barely moving his tongue. Ciara watched in silence. "Oh, so there you are?" Amelie's joyful voice sounded. "We've been looking all over the restaurant for you. And here we are, a wedding without the newlyweds." The woman didn't have time to finish her sentence. She too had looked into the unfortunate room. Ciara turned around and quickly ran to the exit. Amelie tried to catch up with her. Eugene finally realized that he had been spotted. He jumped up, but only managed to walk a few steps and collapsed. "Ciara, my girl, I beg you. Wait," her mother-in-law urged her, catching up with her at the door of the restaurant. "Don't, please. You were right. Then I have no place in your family." "Stop it." "What are you saying?" "What am I saying? Why don't you check with your son? What a fool I was. How long has he been playing me for?" "Wait, give me just 1 minute," Amelie pleaded. "I can imagine what you're feeling right now, but I'm just as confused as you are. I don't think we should jump to conclusions. Amelie, I understand your desire to protect your son, but how can you jump to conclusions? You saw it all yourself. I did. Amelie nodded. But this is nothing like my son. Let's do this. Will you give Stephen and me at least 12 hours? Now you promise me that in those 12 hours you won't do anything stupid and you won't run away. We'll take Eugene back to our place. You saw the state he's in.
Okay, Ciara agreed grudgingly. But I don't know what will change in the meantime. At least we'll try to figure it out.
Don't worry, there's no shame yet, except for you and me. No one's seen Eugene. I'll go back and tell the guests that the newlyweds have decided to celebrate at home alone. We'll try to get Eugene out of here without being seen. You go home. But again, please don't do anything stupid. I'll try, Ciara said, turning around and walking toward the house in her wedding dress. Where are you going? Amelie stopped her. Let me call you a cab. Her mother-in-law called Ciara a cab and sent her home. Ciara got there in a semi-fainting state. For her, everything that was happening was like a terrible dream that would not end. She collapsed on the couch and sighed heavily. Ciara stared at the ceiling silently, tears streaming from her eyes. She didn't even have the strength to change her clothes. She lay like that for several hours until she was awakened by the intercom ringing. Ciara didn't want to go open the door, she didn't want to do anything at all, but it wouldn't stop ringing. So then she forced herself to get up and open the door. Amelie and Stephen walked into the apartment. Ciara, you have your laptop next to you. Is it busy? My father-in-law asked. Yeah, it was lying around here somewhere. Ciara opened the laptop and handed it to Stephen. Great. Now you're going to see something. He inserted a small flash drive into the laptop and turned on the video. It turned out to be the restaurant's security footage. It showed Eugene standing and talking on the phone. At some point he felt sick, leaned against the wall and tried to go outside. At that point, the waitress stopped Eugene and asked him to come with her. She actually walked him up to the empty banquet room and laid him down on a couch. The waitress then stood at the front door and glanced back and forth at the next room, then at her phone. After reading some message, she stood by the door for a while longer, and then approached Eugene. He awkwardly tried to push her away and mumbled something to himself. Then the waitress forcefully tried to kiss him. At the same moment, Ciara looked into the room. So that's what this is all about, she said with rounded eyes. I told you we'd figure it out. Amelie summarized the video. Wait, so Eugene was drugged? How's he feeling right now? We should call the police, request an evaluation. I don't think we're going to need the police here, Stephen told her. Eugene is sleeping it off at our house right now. His pulse is fine. His blood pressure's fine. It's okay. He needs his sleep. I did the forensics myself. I just picked up Eugene's glass. I wouldn't mistake this blend for anything. It's just wine and vodka. What do you mean, vodka? Ciara was surprised. We didn't even order vodka. Some waiter was diligently pouring Eugene a strong wine. Vodka it was. You, I saw, had regular wine, but Eugene, you know, he's not very good with booze. Wine and beer are fine, but anything stronger, his body can't take it. Apparently, the organizers of this performance did not know about such a reaction of Eugene and thought that he would just be tipsy and would fall for some girl. But our fighter fell asleep early. Fantastic. Ciara couldn't get over the shock. So the cameras don't show who was involved in the wine and vodka spiking. No, they didn't have cameras in the kitchen. There are cameras at the bar, but I couldn't get footage there. I could barely get these from the security guard in the lounge. It was the same waitress who poured Eugene's drink, Stephen said. So we have to talk to that waitress, Ciara whispered. I'm not sure how they knew you'd get to the other room at the right time. No, it makes sense, Ciara told her mother-in-law about the 2 mysterious phone calls in the note. Listen, it's like a movie. Amelie wondered, why didn't you tell Eugene everything at once? I didn't think it was so serious. I thought it was just some kind of fraud. I didn't want to ruin Eugene's mood over nothing. Ciara sighed. Yeah, Amelie nodded. I wonder what his reaction will be when he wakes up. I don't think it will be soon, Stephen answered. Knowing some peculiarities of his body, he won't wake up until tomorrow morning. What are we going to do then? Ciara asked, confused. That's right. I suggest we finish what we started. Call your mysterious admirer. Tell him that you were wrong and that you were convinced of what a traitor Eugene was. Thank him and ask him to meet you, preferably right away. Ciara understood, pulled out her phone, and did as Stephen told her. The meeting was set for half an hour later in a nearby public garden. Amelie and Stephen arrived there a little early, pretending to be a couple who decided to take a walk before going to bed. Ciara changed her clothes and went to the public garden 2 minutes before the appointed time. She saw a male figure walking towards her with a brisk gait. The stranger had his cap pulled low. It was impossible to tell who it was from afar. Why didn't you want to give me your phone number that time, Ciara? You wouldn't have learned so much, the man said cheerfully, and took off his cap. So it's you, Ciara exclaimed. Before her stood her former classmate Noah Salvador. I don't know how to thank you. No way. It's enough to go on a date with me. How did you get all that information about Eugene? Connections. Like the waitress at the restaurant where you work who can pour vodka into wine just in time. Ciara was slapped hard before she could finish. You used to be just an indecisive person, but now you've become even more vicious and pathetic. Suddenly, Ciara was approached by her father-in-law and mother-in-law. What, so this is the show organizer? Stephen asked.
I see. But I think he could be prosecuted for slander. And if the actions with drinks are qualified as injury to health. Oh, I'm afraid he won't get off with a suspended sentence, he said.
Ciara, I'm sorry, Noah said pitifully. I just loved you all these years. I can't stand to see you, you bastard. Ciara turned away and looked at Stephen and Amelie. Well, Ciara, I think this man's fate is in your hands, her mother-in-law said calmly. What am I supposed to do with him? Ciara sighed and turned to Noah again. Then that's it, get out of here. But if I see you anywhere even casually again, we will seek a criminal case. Do you understand? Yes, Noah answered obediently. He turned around and walked quickly towards the exit. Stephen and Amelie drove Ciara to their family cottage. They chatted in the kitchen and mocked the previous day. As it turned out, the rest of the wedding guests had guessed nothing and continued to celebrate without the bride and groom. Eugene woke up the next day with a terrible hangover and huge memory lapses. He didn't even remember any of the waitresses. Ciara and her mother-in-law and father-in-law decided not to tell him anything. So unusually began a new family page in the life of a modest girl, Ciara.
Hello, Ciara, did you recognize me? Is it hard to hear? A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. Who is this? I called you this morning and warned you about something.
Oh, you again, Ciara sobered up. What do you want? I don't need anything anymore. All I could do was warn you. Didn't you listen? Now all you have to do is reap the consequences of your mistakes. Cut the crap. Ciara left the table and went to a quieter corner. Can you be traced by your phone number? Do you even know about that? Oh, Ciara, you're a naive girl, the stranger grinned. And to make sure that I'm not lying, you only need to put your hand in the pocket of your husband's jacket. Anyway, you know everything. Call me, please, on this number. Have a good day. The man hung up. Ciara turned around and slowly walked to the table. Eugene still hadn't returned. As luck would have it, he had gone out to talk in just his shirt and left his jacket hanging on the chair. Ciara reluctantly sat down in her seat, looked around, and carefully slipped her hand into Eugene's jacket pocket. There she fumbled for some paper. The girl looked around again and pulled it out. The paper was neatly folded several times and smelled of perfume. Ciara put her hands under the table and unfolded the note, trying to keep a nonchalant expression on her face. The note had only a few words written on it in good handwriting: 07000 in the small banquet room. Waiting. Ciara looked at her watch. It showed 6:55. She wasn't quite sure what was even going on. It all seemed like some kind of idiotic prank. Maybe someone really decided to play a prank on me. Ciara soothed herself. But Eugene knows how much I don't like pranks. Oh, I don't like it. Ciara got up from the table and walked around the room. She knew this restaurant had 2 banquet rooms. The note was probably referring to just the second, smaller banquet room. Ciara didn't immediately decide to head there. It still felt very much like some kind of joke. Maybe she shouldn't fall for it then. But on the other hand, if someone with a dubious sense of humor decided to play a prank on the wedding, why not play along with Eugene? Ciara still had hope that she just wouldn't find that small banquet hall. But no. Her gaze traitorously stopped just outside the small banquet hall sign. She glanced at her watch once more. It took her about 5 minutes to think about it. Then Ciara carefully opened the door and peered inside. The room was in disrepair, with chairs on the tables and decorations lying on the floor. Toward one of those decorations, some girl, most likely a waitress, was clinging passionately to her newfound husband. Ciara went numb. "That's it. That's it. That's enough," Eugene quietly muttered, barely moving his tongue. Ciara watched in silence. "Oh, so there you are." Amelie's joyful voice sounded. "We've been looking all over the restaurant for you. And here we are, a wedding without the newlyweds." The woman didn't have time to finish her sentence. She too had looked into the unfortunate room. Ciara turned around and quickly ran to the exit. Amelie tried to catch up with her. Eugene finally realized that he had been spotted. He jumped up, but only managed to walk a few steps and collapsed. "Ciara, my girl, I beg you, wait," her mother-in-law urged her, catching up with her at the door of the restaurant. "Don't, please. You were right. Then I have no place in your family." "Stop it." "What are you saying?" "What am I saying? Why don't you check with your son? What a fool I was. How long has he been playing me for?" "Wait, give me just 1 minute," Amelie pleaded. "I can imagine what you're feeling right now, but I'm just as confused as you are. I don't think we should jump to conclusions." "Amelie, I understand your desire to protect your son, but how can you jump to conclusions? You saw it all yourself." "I did," Amelie nodded. "But this is nothing like my son. Let's do this. Will you give Stephen and me at least 12 hours? Now you promise me that in those 12 hours you won't do anything stupid and you won't run away. We'll take Eugene back to our place. You saw the state he's in." "Okay," Ciara agreed grudgingly. "But I don't know what will change in the meantime. At least we'll try to figure it out." "Don't worry, there's no shame yet, except for you and me. No one's seen Eugene. I'll go back and tell the guests that the newlyweds have decided to celebrate at home alone. We'll try to get Eugene out of here without being seen. You go home. But again, please don't do anything stupid." "I'll try," Ciara said, turning around and walking toward the house in her wedding dress. "Where are you going?" Amelie stopped her. "Let me call you a cab." Her mother-in-law called Ciara a cab and sent her home. Ciara got there in a semi-fainting state. For her, everything that was happening was like a terrible dream that would not end. She collapsed on the couch and sighed heavily. Ciara stared at the ceiling silently, tears streaming from her eyes. She didn't even have the strength to change her clothes. She lay like that for several hours until she was awakened by the intercom ringing. Ciara didn't want to go open the door. She didn't want to do anything at all, but it wouldn't stop ringing. So then she forced herself to get up and open the door. Amelie and Stephen walked into the apartment. "Ciara, you have your laptop next to you. Is it busy?" my father-in-law asked. "Yeah, it was lying around here somewhere." Ciara opened the laptop and handed it to Stephen. "Great. Now you're going to see something." He inserted a small flash drive into the laptop and turned on the video. It turned out to be the restaurant security footage. It showed Eugene standing and talking on the phone. At some point he felt sick, leaned against the wall and tried to go outside. At that point, the waitress stopped Eugene and asked him to come with her. She actually walked him up to the empty banquet room and laid him down on a couch. The waitress then stood at the front door and glanced back and forth at the next room, then at her phone. After reading some message, she stood by the door for a while longer and then approached Eugene. He awkwardly tried to push her away and mumbled something to himself. Then the waitress forcefully tried to kiss him. At the same moment, Ciara looked into the room. "So that's what this is all about," she said with rounded eyes. I told you we'd figure it out. Amelie summarized the video. Wait, so Eugene was drugged? How's he feeling right now? We should call the police, request an evaluation. I don't think we're going to need the police here, Stephen told her. Eugene is sleeping it off at our house right now. His pulse is fine, his blood pressure's fine. It's okay. He needs his sleep. I did the forensics myself. I just picked up Eugene's glass. I wouldn't mistake this blend for anything. It's just wine and vodka. What do you mean, vodka? Ciara was surprised. We didn't even order vodka. Some waiter was diligently pouring Eugene a strong wine. Vodka it was. I saw, had regular wine, but Eugene, he's not very good with booze. Wine and beer are fine, but anything stronger, his body can't take it. Apparently, the organizers of this performance did not know about such a reaction of Eugene and thought that he would just be tipsy and would fall for some girl. But our fighter fell asleep early. Fantastic. Ciara couldn't get over the shock. So the cameras don't show who was involved in the wine and vodka spiking. No, they didn't have cameras in the kitchen. There are cameras at the bar, but I couldn't get footage there. I could barely get these from the security guard in the lounge. It was the same waitress who poured Eugene's drink, Stephen said. So we have to talk to that waitress, Ciara whispered. I'm not sure how they knew you'd get to the other room at the right time. No, it makes sense, Ciara told her mother-in-law about the 2 mysterious phone calls in the note. Listen, it's like a movie. Amelie wondered, why didn't you tell Eugene everything at once? I didn't think it was so serious. I thought it was just some kind of fraud. I didn't want to ruin Eugene's mood over nothing. Ciara sighed. Yeah, Amelie nodded. I wonder what his reaction will be when he wakes up. I don't think it will be soon, Stephen answered. Knowing some peculiarities of his body, he won't wake up until tomorrow morning. What are we going to do then? Ciara asked, confused. That's right. I suggest we finish what we started. Call your mysterious admirer, tell him that you were wrong, and that you were convinced of what a traitor Eugene was. Thank him and ask him to meet you, preferably right away. Ciara understood, pulled out her phone, and did as Stephen told her. The meeting was set for half an hour later in a nearby public garden. Amelie and Stephen arrived there a little early, pretending to be a couple who decided to take a walk before going to bed. Ciara changed her clothes and went to the public garden 2 minutes before the appointed time. She saw a male figure walking towards her with a brisk gait. The stranger had his cap pulled low. It was impossible to tell who it was from afar. Why didn't you want to give me your phone number that time, Ciara? You wouldn't have learned so much, the man said cheerfully and took off his cap. So it's you, Ciara exclaimed. Before her stood her former classmate Noah Salvador. I don't know how to thank you. No way. It's enough to go on a date with me. How did you get all that information about Eugene? Connections. Connections, like the waitress at the restaurant where you work who can pour vodka into wine just in time? Ciara was slapped hard before she could finish. You used to be just an indecisive person, but now you've become even more vicious and pathetic. Suddenly, Ciara was approached by her father-in-law and mother-in-law. What, so this is the show organizer? Stephen asked. I see. But I think he could be prosecuted for slander. And if the actions with drinks are qualified as injury to health. Oh, I'm afraid he won't get off with a suspended sentence, he said. Ciara, I'm sorry, Noah said pitifully. I just loved you all these years. I can't stand to see you, you bastard. Ciara turned away and looked at Stephen and Amelie. Well, Ciara, I think this man's fate is in your hands, her mother-in-law said calmly. What am I supposed to do with him? Ciara sighed and turned to Noah again. Then that's it, get out of here. But if I see you anywhere, even casually again, we will seek a criminal case. Do you understand? Yes, Noah answered obediently. He turned around and walked quickly towards the exit. Stephen and Amelie drove Ciara to their family cottage. They chatted in the kitchen and mocked the previous day. As it turned out, the rest of the wedding guests had guessed nothing and continued to celebrate without the bride and groom. Eugene woke up the next day with a terrible hangover and huge memory lapses. He didn't even remember any of the waitresses. Ciara and her mother-in-law and father-in-law decided not to tell him anything. So unusually began a new family page in the life of a modest girl, Ciara. Helene reluctantly wandered home because she had been caring for her fading mother-in-law for a year and barely overheard. "Helene, shall we relax after the work week? Go to a cafe? Go shopping?" asked a full of cheerful woman at her colleague, coming out of the passageway of the furniture factory. "I would very much like to, but I cannot," answered Ellen. "And all with your mother-in-law tortured. You've had a cross to bear, Helene." "I'm not complaining. Who else could?" "All right, grace my streetcar." Ellen, an accountant at the furniture factory, ran to the bus stop to catch the streetcar. She couldn't find a free seat and got on the back of an old carriage. "With your mother-in-law, you're tormenting yourself." Helene couldn't get her caring colleague's phrase out of her head. It was about her 75-year-old mother-in-law. Ellen had been widowed a year ago and had the burden of caring for her husband's mother. Her mother-in-law, Lexi, was a difficult character. All her life she had worked in management positions and was used to being in control of everything. But a few years ago, her health began to fail. She began to walk with difficulty and had a microstroke. And the death of her son finally took its toll on Lexi. She could move around the apartment, but it was almost impossible for her to go outside, to the store, without help. And at home there were cases when the woman could not stand on her feet and fell on the way to the kitchen. Therefore Ellen tried never to be late at work and hurried home. It could not be said that she did this with any particular enthusiasm. Lexi's difficult temper, control mania, and sharp tongue made Ellen very uncomfortable. The older woman always knew best where things were, where Ellen needed to go, and what time to be home. Ellen felt like she was trapped in a tower with a dragon, and there was no telling when she would be able to get out. There were days when she just didn't want to go back to her mother-in-law's house. She could hardly contain her irritation and anger, lest she lash out at the sick woman. But Ellen realized that Lexi had no one left but her, and that taking care of her was the best memory of her husband. Ellen wasn't particularly cheerful this day either. She realized that now she was going to have to go through the routine of reporting on the previous day and listening to Lexi's instructions. When she got home, Ellen opened the front door, walked into the hallway, and heard her mother-in-law talking to someone on the phone. "You wouldn't believe how lucky everything turned out," Lexi said excitedly. That was the tone of voice she would use with her longtime friend Annie. Ellen didn't go into the room and decided to wait for the conversation to end. "Close. Now I'll sell the apartment successfully and live out my last days with dignity. And my sister-in-law is free from the case. Signed the contracts today. I have all the documents in hand." At this point, Helen shuddered, alarmed, and began to listen even more attentively. What black realtors? You don't understand anything. Everything is legal, I tell you. Do not come to me. Stay at your place." Lexi was raising her voice more and more. They sometimes fought with her friend, but Ellen had never heard her mother-in-law talk like that before. Annie could use a harsh word, too. She worked in the legal department of the same company Lexi ran. Annie was retired now, but still interested in legal news, always warning her friend against new dubious schemes. Ellen heard her mother-in-law hang up the phone and walked into the room. "Good evening, Lexi." She said a quiet hello. "Ellen, hi. Listen, come here." The mother-in-law sat in her favorite chair, holding out some papers to Ellen. "Read it. What is it?" Helene asked, perplexed. "This is our happiness." Helene took the papers in her hands. On one of them was written a deed of gift. Ellen shuddered and continued reading. "I, Kaylin Lexi, being of sound mind and sober mind, donate the apartment, which belongs to me by right of ownership, to the organization." Ellen couldn't read any further. Eyes wide open, she looked at her mother-in-law. "What are you doing?" "Well, and you too, or what? Sit down." "I'll tell you everything," Lexi began. "A young man and a girl came to see me this afternoon. They represented some kind of social organization, which is engaged in helping the elderly and providing care for them. Anyway, they offered me a deal. I sell them the apartment. And they put me in a boarding house where I'll be cared for around the clock." You understand, Helen. I'm getting weaker as the years go by, and soon you won't be able to handle everything with me. And this way you'll go to live with yourself. I don't understand. What's not to understand? I sold the apartment for a little less than it would have cost on the market. For that, I get a place in a boarding house, a private room, a private nurse, and a view of the forest. Isn't that wonderful? Then why does it say deed of gift? Because it's faster. A sale, or whatever it's called, takes a long time to process. It's a lot of paperwork. This is just one signature, and that's it. But don't worry, it's all taken care of. Here I took a receipt from them, where they agreed to pay me $3 million. Lexi held out another piece of paper to Ellen. Ellen looked at it. It was a handwritten receipt. You know, Ellen started hesitantly. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think receipts are issued in these cases. Do you understand much? The mother-in-law raised her voice again, now at Helene. What, you wanted this apartment for yourself so badly? Don't worry, I don't need that $3 million. It'll be yours anyway. What do I need your money for? What are you saying? Helene started to justify herself. I'm worried about being cheated. It's all legal. What organization were these people from? Young Old Age, I think. Ellen took out her phone and quickly typed the name of the organization into a search engine. The first link started with the word scammers. She began scrolling through dozens of reviews, and each one told of schemes to scam the elderly. Lexi, they're scammers. Is that what they say on your internet? Her mother-in-law wouldn't listen to her daughter-in-law. It's all about writing nasty things. Look, they put their address here, Lexi said. If you want, you can go check it out yourself. Ellen took the sheet with the address, got dressed, and quickly left the apartment. The office of this organization was located in the heart of Swan's Town. Ellen had to take the streetcar again. The woman was very worried, and not because of the apartment. Ellen had her own apartment, where she and her husband lived. The children had grown up and moved to New York. The apartment was empty, and Ellen could always go back to it if she needed to. It wasn't what she was afraid of. Lexi might just not be able to survive something like this. Losing the apartment would be a real blow to her. And that wasn't the worst-case scenario. There was no telling what these people would want to do to Lexi to avoid taking care of her. Ellen didn't want to think about that. Yes, her mother-in-law wasn't the easiest person to deal with, and her daughter-in-law had suffered a lot because of her. But still a family member. Despite everything, Ellen treated her well. You just realize that everyone's temper is different, she thought. Especially when Ellen and her husband had just started their relationship. Lexi had helped them out a lot. That very empty apartment had been bought by Ellen, not without her involvement. So Ellen was determined to get to the bottom of the situation. Getting to the right address, the woman saw a small business center. Entering, she asked the janitor for the office number and went up to the 3rd floor. It was a shabby building of some factory that had been hastily converted into office space. Reaching the right door, Ellen knocked and went in. The workday is over, the woman sitting behind the desk said in a nasty voice. She was putting papers in a bag and was clearly leaving. It says on the door that you work until 7. It's 6:55 p.m. Ellen said sternly. All right, what do you got there? Your company scammed an elderly woman today, my mother-in-law. Young lady, we're not scamming anyone. It's the law. No, don't give me that bullshit. Your employees said they were a social organization. Is that right? We are a social organization, the woman interrupted Ellen for the second time. A social organization for scamming the elderly. I've read your reviews. I demand that you immediately cancel all contracts. Calm down, girl, calm down. We conclude all contracts in accordance with all legal requirements, so no one will cancel anything here. Then I'll file a police report against you. Right. You're not the first, so to speak. First they watch their old people, then they run around complaining. You don't even hide the fact that people like you want to get rid of their elderly relatives. How dare you? Ellen could not believe her ears. The woman unashamedly told her what their scheme was designed to do. What? What? How dare I? We're only making things better for you. What do you think, we don't have a boarding house? We're just trying to steal your naive relative's apartment. No, we do send old people to a place where they'll get better care than yours. It's just a whole apartment to pay for it. Well, what do you want? Business like this, times like this. I'll see you in court, Ellen said stiffly and walked out of the office. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. Fraudsters sitting in the center of Swan and not even hiding their dark intentions. What good would it do if Lexi was actually sent to a boarding house? She wouldn't live there long anyway, knowing she'd been scammed. No, these people had to be dealt with at any cost. So Ellen went to the police. Never in her life had she ever filed a report or gone to court. But now she was ready for anything, so strong was her anger toward these people. The police station was not far from the office center. Ellen reached it on foot in just 10 minutes. Once inside, she saw a sign that read Duty Station. Ellen went to the window under the sign that said Front Desk. "Hello, I'd like to file a report." "Take the form, write it down." The employee answered in a machine-like manner, holding out the form. He was on the phone and didn't even look at who was in front of him. Ellen spent a long time writing the statement, choosing the right wording. She wanted the police to get to the bottom of this as quickly as possible. When she had filled out the form, she handed it to the officer on duty. He finally took his eyes off the screen and began to read. "Okay, name, address, phone number." "Oh, young aging. Do you already know something about this organization?" We do. We've had 3 of these applications this month." "How are they being handled?" "It's not going well. We've already checked this company, everything's clean. So you're wasting your time trying to do something. This case is a dead end." "What do you mean, lame? Are you refusing to take my statement?" "Come on, citizen. We have no right to refuse to accept it. We'll just file it in a folder, and then all you have to do is wait." Helene left the office in a depressed state. She didn't know what to do next. She didn't want to go home for other reasons. She just couldn't say those words to Lexi that she had been cheated and there was no chance of justice. After reaching home, Ellen leisurely made her way up to the floor and entered the apartment. Usually Lexi was watching TV loudly, but this time there was silence in the room. "What's up?" the mother-in-law asked quietly. "We'll figure it out," Ellen whispered. So it was a hoax after all? Lexi was usually a long-winded person, but eventually she could be persuaded. This was one of those times. I guess so. Lexi covered her face with her hands. The old fool. "Come on, Lexi." Ellen ran up to her mother-in-law. "You and I are not alone. There are several reports on this office, so they'll definitely look into it." That's how I continued the story. Of course, Ellen hid the words of the front desk clerk from Lexi. What to do next, she didn't know yet, but now it was important to support her mother-in-law, so she had to make up some reassuring words. "You're like a child, aren't you?" Lexi lamented, and I was happy about it. "I told you we'll figure it out." "Did they give you a timeline?" "Yes, they said that in 2 weeks we should pack up and move to the boarding house." "So we have plenty of time." 2 weeks, Helen nodded. In fact, she was thinking, I have to think of something in time. At least I'll lie that I got the money from them. The next morning, Ellen was awakened by a phone call. Usually, even on weekends, she got up early. But last night she couldn't sleep for a long time, so she lay awake until 10 in the morning. Glancing at the screen, she saw an undefined number and was startled. For some reason, she was suddenly sure that it was the same scammers calling. Ellen thought for a while whether to pick up the phone or not. In the end, she decided to answer. "Eileen Vasilievna?" a stern voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Swan. I'm an investigator. I've read your statement. I was wondering if you could come down to the station today." Yeah, what time should I be there?" "Right now. Just bring all the documents, contracts, and receipts." Helene quickly got ready, prepared her mother-in-law's lunch, and rushed to the station. She felt a sense of hope. It meant that at least the application had been taken into consideration and not just thrown into a folder. She didn't bother telling Lexi she was going to the police station, just that she was going on business. She wanted her mother-in-law to think as little as possible about the situation, even though she realized that was impossible. Especially since it was already 11 days from now, she would most likely have to leave. Ellen entered the now familiar building and approached the duty officer. There sat another employee who told her which office to go to. She walked down the long hallway almost to the end and saw a sign that read Senior Investigator Captain Swan. She knocked on the open door. "Hello, may I be Helen? You called me today?" "Good afternoon." "Come in and have a seat," replied the investigator's stern baritone. He was a stately man in his 40s with graying on his temples. He was actively typing something on the computer. Ellen hesitantly sat down across from him, and after about 20 seconds, Captain Swan turned his attention from the computer to her. "I'm sorry, there's so much to fill out," the investigator said as he began to look for something on his desk. "Aha, here. I have familiarized myself with your statement. I'll tell you at once. The situation is not new and rather sad. In neighboring cities, this scheme has long been known. 3 months ago, these scoundrels moved in here. I was told by the duty officer that there have already been 3 reports." Captain Swan twirled some papers in his hands. "Yes, that's right, here they are. But I'm a little more interested in yours than the others. Apparently, your mother-in-law was more meticulous. So the crooks had to do a little more paperwork with her. May I see the contract and the receipt?" "Sure." Ellen handed the papers to the investigator. "Interesting," Swan said, studying the documents. "But I expected more, of course." "What did you expect?" "That there would be some circumstances written into the gift contract analyzing it. You just wrote in the statement that they assured in writing about all the nuances of the transaction. But the promises there about board and care and such. And that information can't be contained in such documents, which means it becomes invalid. Well, no, these guys got it right." "What about the receipt?" "The receipt is interesting. The other victims were all verbal assurances. But your Swan looked at the statement. Lexi asked for some kind of written commitment. Did the receipt have any validity?" Sadly, no. A receipt is for a loan. This is just a promise to hand over money. So any court will send you away with a piece of paper like that. But either way, it's new. So we have at least a handwriting sample and an employee's signature. So if you don't mind, I'll scan this paper," said the investigator. Sure. And what should I do with my mother-in-law? I'm a straightforward person, so I will not hide. Prepare for the worst. Even if we catch on to something, it will take a very long time. You guys have 2 weeks to leave too, right?" "Well, we can't do anything in 2 weeks. There's practically no evidence. Everything is done according to the law." "Have you checked the boarding house? Maybe they poison old people there so they don't have to deal with them." "Of course, we didn't check 5-star hotels, but everything is legal. The conditions there are minimal. So if there's another place for Grandma, you'd better take her there." "But they promised her personal nurses care nature. Isn't that slander? Can't they at least be prosecuted for that?" "Misinformation in advertising is an administrative offense, not a criminal offense. And a verbal promise. It would be hard to prove anything, and there's no need. Our task is to bring this case to bigger crimes. But with this kind of data, we're not going to be able to do that anytime soon." "So you're suggesting we just give them the apartment and leave quietly?" "You already gave it to them?" "Not you. Well, your mother-in-law did. So you're in someone else's apartment right now. I understand your feelings, but I'm being as frank as I can and telling it like it is. I'll try to do everything I can. But I can't promise anything, especially in the near future. Hopefully they'll make a breakthrough soon and we'll be able to catch them by the tail." "Okay, I get it. Thank you." Ellen walked out of the investigator's office. There was no point in hoping for quick help from the police, so she had to act on her own. She took her phone and began to scroll through the list of contacts. Ellen did not have any acquaintances in the authorities or the bar. The only person who had anything to do with law was Annie, her mother-in-law's friend. Without thinking, Ellen dialed her number. "Annie, hi. This is Ellen, your friend Lexi Callan's sister-in-law." "Hello, Lenachka. I didn't recognize your voice right away, Annie replied good-naturedly. You know, we had a very unpleasant story with the apartment. Yes, I overheard you and Lexi talking yesterday. Anyway, you were absolutely right in your concerns. What a stupid situation. It's a common way to cheat, and I've told you about people like that many times. Why didn't she listen to me? Why don't I know what's gotten into her? They must have influenced her somehow. They have special techniques, like hypnosis. Distracting, misleading. And that's it, fooling our old ladies. Sounds like it. I don't remember Lexi agreeing to anything quickly. But I take it you're not just calling to share your concerns. Yeah, you're right. I just got off the phone with the police. They say it's a very complicated situation, and it's unlikely anything will change in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, Lexi has to move out. Of course, I'm not putting her in a boarding house. I'm taking her back to my place. But you realize what a blow this is going to be for her. I do. Luda's been very down lately. So yes, she doesn't need this kind of stress. Come to my place now. I have my son at home. He's a lawyer. Maybe we can work something out together. Ellen thanked Annie for the offer and rushed to her. In general, they did not see her mother-in-law's friend very often. While her husband was alive, they met only at general celebrations. After his death, a little more often, Annie lived nearby and once a week came to visit her friend. But at that time, Ellen was usually not at home. But even in those rare encounters, Ellen had formed a very good impression of the woman. Annie was a little younger than Lexi and had a completely different personality. Sometimes Ellen wondered how such two completely different women could be friends, the nervous, bossy Lexi and the good-natured, simple Annie. They were both quite emotional and could always stand up for themselves and their rights. When Ellen heard that Annie was willing to help, she was glad. Yes, she had no plan, and it would be foolish to expect an older woman, even though she was a lawyer in the past, to have one. Nevertheless, Ellen felt much calmer at heart. She quickly made her way to Annie's house, who lived a few blocks away from Lexi. Once she got to the 3rd floor, she rang the bell. The door was opened by a man in his 40s, wearing a cardigan and white shirt. Good afternoon. I'm here to see Annie, Ellen said a little shyly. Yes, come in, we're waiting for you. Ellen entered the apartment. I'm Christian, Annie's son, a lawyer. Nice to meet you, Helene replied and went into the room. It was furnished in a Soviet-style luxurious way, a full wall closet, many sets, a huge crystal chandelier, and 2 wide leather armchairs. Annie sat on one of them. Sit down, Lenotchka. The woman pointed to the neighboring chair. Christian also came into the room and sat down on the chair next to it. Thank you for seeing me, Ellen said politely. Of course not, how could you not? Annie replied cheerfully. Let's get down to business. Do you still have the papers Lexi signed, or did you give everything to the police? No, just copies. I have everything with me, Ellen pulled a folder out of her bag and handed it to Annie. She handed it to Christian without even looking at the contents. We have a professional sitting here, let him sort it out, said the old woman sneeringly. Actually, I'm not a professional, Christian said, studying the documents. I'm a criminal lawyer and I don't know much about civil contracts, but everything seems to be in order at first glance. I'll take a picture and send it to a colleague. Sometimes Ellen wondered how such two completely different women could become friends, nervous, bossy Lexi and good-natured, simple Annie. At the same time, they were both quite emotional and could always stand up for themselves and their rights. Hearing that Annie was willing to help, Ellen was overjoyed. Yes, she had no plan, and it would be foolish to expect an older woman, even though she was a lawyer in the past, to have one. Nevertheless, Ellen felt much more at peace. He specializes in that kind of deal. And the receipt? Take a look at it, please, Ellen asked. It's the same. I can't say anything. I can only give it to a handwriting expert. But I don't think that would do us any good, said the lawyer. I've just been thinking, Annie began to say. Actually, we have two ways, civil and criminal. We don't have any leads for the criminal one at first sight. Although if the investigator was interested in this case, it's for a reason. In the civil way, we can demand to challenge this contract, to recognize the deal as invalid. "We can't," Christian interrupted my mom. I was immediately answered by a colleague. "In general, we don't have any clues to go the civil way either. The scheme is known not only to us. These swindlers used to work in a neighboring town." He writes that they were not approached from any side, and sued, and in the pre-trial order tried to solve. All to no avail. Somehow they forced these poor old ladies to sign all the documents, and that's it. But that's all the better, Annie said cheerfully. "Excuse me, why better?" Ellen was puzzled. "And that we have only an option to catch them in a criminal offense. And in the case of a successful resolution of the issue, we will not only be able to return the apartment of your mother-in-law, and also for a long time to put the whole gang." It sounds, of course, tempting, but you said yourself that there are no leads. "That's just at first glance," Annie said. "We need to find out as much as we can about how they work. I can't believe that someone like Lexi could sign off on everything so calmly, can you?" She didn't sign it quietly. Even the investigator said that these social workers usually do without a receipt, a verbal promise Ellen remembered. It's still strange that they managed to calm her down with one single receipt, which has no legal force whatsoever, Christian objected. She didn't know that the receipt was null and void, Ellen objected. "My dear, you remember Lexi well, don't you? Is it enforceable? It's not. You can't get away with that. That's true." The lawyer obviously remembered the character of his mother's friend. "So I think we need to get them out in the open," Annie concluded. "How do we do that?" Ellen didn't understand. "You have me, Annie," an old, lonely woman exclaimed. She glanced at Christian. "Well, almost lonely, the perfect victim for this gang. We've got to get them on me somehow. They're coming after my apartment. So we're going to try to catch them on something." "Mom, wait, are you being serious right now?" "Are you serious?" Christian asked. "Seriously. If anything, you'll be there for us." But Annie stepped in. "Ellen, it's really dangerous. Maybe they won't hurt you, but what if they do use some kind of hypnosis, and you give them the apartment too? Well, you'll be around to interfere. Christian, I think, can organize everything for a good surveillance." "But I don't know," the lawyer hesitated. "Do you have any better options?" Annie asked. No, Christian shook his head. "If it were another woman sitting in your place, I'd be the first to suggest baiting. That's just it. So that's it. I don't want to hear it. It's settled." "Why don't we get the police involved?" Samantha suggested it. "No, they won't help," Christian said. "They're so busy, they don't care about our suspicions." "Then how are we going to control the situation? What if we just can't intervene in time?" "We'll install video surveillance in the apartment," the lawyer replied. "Do you have any special equipment?" "No, they only install hidden cameras in soap operas. We work a little simpler. An ordinary cell phone will do as a hidden camera. We'll make a video call. We'll put one cell phone behind the sideboard, for example, so that only the camera sticks out. And from the other phone we'll watch and listen. Simple, legal and effective." Wow. Helene was surprised by the simplicity of Christian's idea. "What did you want?" Annie asked. "They, the lawyers, are under strict supervision now. You can't make a move, but still." Ellen was worried about her mother-in-law's friend. "Why don't I at least call the investigator? He seems to be a smart man," she suggested. "No need," Helene, Christian said firmly. "You see, they have everything by the book there. Surveillance, warrants, they'll ruin the whole operation. And in general, most likely they'll send us away." Ellen sighed heavily. She'd lived by the rules all her life. She'd never done anything so amateurish. Never had she or anyone around her had any problems with crooks or the police. So the woman felt like she was in a soap opera. Only she had to play one of the main roles, not of her own free will. "But let me ask you, how are we going to point them at me?" Annie asked. "Here in the contract there is an address and phone number." Ellen pointed at one of the papers. "Maybe you could call, say that the neighbors found out about them, and you, as a single woman, really need care." "That's a great idea, Ellen. Christian, give me that piece of paper." Annie pulled out her cell phone, dialed a number, and waited for a connection. unavailable. That was odd. Maybe they don't work on Saturdays? Ellen asked. I don't think so. Every client is worth their weight in gold. Such offices should take calls 24 hours a day. It's something else. Maybe I scared them off. Ellen remembered her trip to the company yesterday. When I was there yesterday, I promised them I'd call the police. So they got scared and decided to run out of town. That's a possibility, Annie thought. What if they hadn't had time to pack for the day? Christian joined the conversation. Maybe the phone was disconnected. But they hadn't had time to leave the office yet. They wouldn't want to lose a client who'd come to them on her own. What do you mean? Ellen asked. I mean that we have to go to them now. Annie didn't let her son answer. All three of them quickly got ready and went down to Christian's car. 15 minutes later, they were already there. There she is. Look, Ellen pointed to a woman with a bag coming out of the office center. I talked to her yesterday. Then what are you looking at? I'm going to give you a master class, Annie said, and was about to get out of the car. Mom, wait. Christian stopped his mom and went into the glove compartment. From there, he took out a cell phone and called it from his own. Put it in your pocket, just in case we're listening to you. Annie took the phone and got out of the car. Not many people would have agreed to take such a gamble, and there was no telling what moved her more, the desire to help her friend in trouble or the interest to take part in a dangerous case. Annie quickly caught up with the woman, stood for a moment, took a breath, and called out to her. Excuse me, please, what happened? She asked. The woman turned around. I'm so embarrassed to ask this, Annie said in a pitiful voice. I think I'm lost. I left the house to go to the management company. Anyway, I've gotten really old. Do you have your cell phone with you? Have you called your family? Do you have a phone? What's the use of it? I don't have any relatives. They've moved away and left everything behind, the woman thought. What am I going to do with you? Do you even remember your address? I remember the street, not so much the house. Why are you like this? Let me take you to the street. Maybe you'll remember the area. Oh, my daughter, you're a lifesaver. Thank you. Wait, I haven't done anything yet. What street is there, Mayakovsky? We'll be there in no time. The woman took Annie under her arm. Come on, my car is not far away. Helene and Christian watched everything from the car. What are we going to do? Ellen was worried. Let's drive carefully behind them, Christian said, changed gears and carefully drove off. The woman put Annie in the car, got behind the wheel and drove toward Mayakovsky Street, where Ellen's mother-in-law and her friend lived. Do you think she took the bait? Christian asked. I think so, Helene replied. Christian kept his distance, following the con artist's car. This lady didn't look like she had much heart. She wouldn't just help out like that. She smells a profit, Helene said. The phone was silent for 10 minutes. Helene and Christian even began to worry a little. Maybe the connection was broken, Helene suggested. But driving into Mayakovsky Street, a woman asked Annie. Well, do you recognize it? I recognize the neighborhood, my daughter, I do. Let me walk further on my own, answered Annie. No, let me take you to the entrance, the woman insisted. Annie began to explain to the woman how to get to her house. A couple minutes later, the car was there. Ellen and Christian parked in a neighboring yard. I'm not going to let you go so easily now, Annie said thoughtfully. Come in and I'll make you some tea. I'd love that, said the woman, obviously realizing that she had found her latest victim in this city. They walked slowly up to the apartment. Annie pretended to be a frail old woman, so she tried to move as slowly as possible. In the apartment, she sat the woman on a chair, moved the phone from her jacket into her pants pocket so that Ellen and Christian could hear everything, and went into the kitchen to make tea. So what you said, no one from your relatives is looking after you? The woman asked. They've all gone away. They don't care about me. Annie was making up a story as she went along. I never asked for anything. I always did everything myself, to the store, to the clinic, and to get money. But in recent months, something completely bad has become. Many people sometimes refuse. Now I've got a headache. What's your name, my daughter? Isabel? Annie asked. I think you are very lucky to have met me today, the woman replied. Yes, you've been a great help to me. I don't know how to thank you. And that's not the only reason. Now you're going to want to thank me even more, Isabel said. Annie gave a puzzled look on her face. The con artist continued. The thing is that I work in a social organization. We are engaged in helping lonely old people, providing them with a dignified old age. What a good girl you are. How do you do it? Annie asked. It's simple. We offer you a place in a wonderful boarding house on the banks of the river overlooking the forest. Good repairs, caring staff, and most importantly, you will not have to make any monthly payments. You will have a personal nurse, constant assistance, checkups in general, everything you want. You say that so beautifully, but I don't have any savings. Everything goes on medication, Annie sighed. You won't have to pay anything, I'm telling you. But you will benefit from it, won't you? I'll tell you straight, of course there will be benefits. First of all, such organizations are helped by the state. There are some benefits for charitable activities. And secondly, tell me, what do you plan to do with your apartment? I don't plan to do anything. I'll wait until I die. It'll go to one of my children and grandchildren. Any of the same kids who left you here. It's one thing for them not to visit you or help you. Come on, they're still kids. That's the way it is. Old people die, leave their possessions to their children. Whatever they are, said Annie. I've been thinking about selling this place myself for a while now. Why would an old woman need so many rooms? But I was afraid to deal with those realtors. If you do the paperwork yourself, Annie said thoughtfully. Of course we will. And I'll be honest with you, that's where our second profit will be. A few % of the sale we will send to the accounts of our social organization. That money will go exclusively to help similarly lonely old people, said Isabel. Well, at the end of your life, you can do a good deed. Come on, what end? Think of it as the beginning, Isabel smiled. Did I manage to please you, my child? And what do I have to do? Sign some papers. Come to your place? Annie asked. You don't have to go anywhere. Our employee will come to you today, tell you everything in detail, prepare the necessary papers, and show you what you need to sign. All you have to do is to prepare your passport, and we will do the rest. I'm very happy for you. You're very lucky today. When is he coming? Right now. No, you'll be home from 5 to 6. Where would I go? Of course I will. That's when a young man from our organization will come to see you. The woman said goodbye to Annie and left. Christian and Ellen waited until she left the entrance and got out of the car. They had 3 hours to prepare the operation. They went up to Annie's apartment. Mom, you're a piece of work. Christian marveled at Annie's acting. Mastery, you know, replied the old woman modestly. Listen, this is all wonderful, but do we have a concrete plan of action? Ellen asked. That's what we're going to do now, said Christian. He walked around the room, looking at every corner of it. I think we'll set up the camera here. He pointed to the center section of a long cabinet, where the Venetian crystal stood. I've got a white phone case right here. I don't think it will be visible. Then we'll need to move the chair a little. And the other one too. Christian moved the chair half sideways with a slight movement. Then he walked over to a small black table and placed it exactly centered between the chairs. Now the table and chairs will be visible on the camera, Christian said. Mom, he said to Annie, we'll have to make sure that all paperwork is done at this table. And in general, try not to leave the camera's field of view. I understand, Annie nodded. Tell me, will you use real documents? What if they have time to register something? Ellen was worried. Do I have a choice? I haven't made any other passports for myself. And it's dangerous to make forged copies, you know. It seems to me that the most important thing in our business is authenticity. They can't even think that something's gone wrong. Don't worry about me. I'll definitely be able to read the document before I sign it, said Annie. All right, Let's say everything goes as it should. Ellen decided to imagine a possible situation. He'll come in and start telling you about his services. You will pretend that you are very interested, that you are impressed. Then he will pull out a contract and ask you to sign it. It won't be so fast from here, Lenotchka Annie interrupted her. Then I'll start torturing him with all sorts of questions. Are they not crooks? How much will they sell the apartment for? Will they show any other documents? Christian has joined the conversation. Then you can move on to personal questions. Start pestering this person like the wife, like the kids. Jump to the discussion of the latest news. In general, Ellen, the task of the mom will be to make him irritated. You see, when a person is annoyed, he has less control and can start making mistakes. Exactly, agreed Annie. And the climax of the play will be the signing of the contract. He'll get his paper, and I'll turn from an annoying old lady into an experienced lawyer. I'll ask him a direct question. Why does it say here that it's a gift contract and not a sale contract? He'll start making excuses. Christian made a slight movement to put the chair half sideways. Then he walked over to a small black table and placed it exactly centered between the chairs. Now the table and chairs will be visible on the camera, Christian said. Mom, he said to Annie, will have to make sure that all paperwork is done at this table. And in general, try not to leave the camera's field of view. I understand, Annie nodded. Tell me, will you use real documents? What if they have time to register something? Ellen was worried. Do I have a choice? I haven't made any other passports for myself. And it's dangerous to make forged copies, you know. It seems to me that the most important thing in our business is authenticity. They can't even think that something's gone wrong. Don't worry about me. I'll definitely be able to read the document before I sign it, said Annie. All right, let's say everything goes as it should. Ellen decided to imagine a possible situation. He'll come in and start telling you about his services. You will pretend that you are very interested, that you are impressed. Then he will pull out a contract and ask you to sign it. It won't be so fast from here, Lenotchka Annie interrupted her. Then I'll start torturing him with all sorts of questions. Are they not crooks? How much will they sell the apartment for? Will they show any other documents? Christian has joined the conversation. Then you can move on to personal questions. Start pestering this person like the wife, like the kids. Jump to the discussion of the latest news. In general, Ellen, the task of the mom will be to make him irritated. You see, when a person is annoyed, he has less control and can start making mistakes. Exactly, agreed Annie. And the climax of the play will be the signing of the contract. He'll get his paper, and I'll turn from an annoying old lady into an experienced lawyer. I'll ask him a direct question. Why does it say here that it's a gift contract and not a sale contract? He'll start making up all kinds of excuses. That's what he'll get caught on, Christian said. After all, everything will be recorded on camera. Very interesting. Ellen listened carefully to the plan. But how are you going to get out of signing the contract? You're not going to sign it, are you? Of course I won't, Annie replied. I'm going to pretend I have a heart condition. I'll ask for an ambulance. I think at that point he'll get scared and run away. He doesn't want any more witnesses. And he won't want to explain to the doctors who he is, how it happened. But that's not the whole plan. Let's say by some miraculous miracle, he gets me to sign this piece of paper. There will be 2 cups of tea on the table. After all, a gracious hostess is obliged to offer her dear guest a drink. After signing, I will awkwardly tip the cups onto the paper, and with a slight movement of my hand, the contract will turn to mush and rags. But eventually you'll figure something out and keep him out of the driveway with the contract, Ellen said. Just don't overdo it. And Tulloch Christian nodded. Well, Helene, are you calm now? Yes. Impressive, Annie said cheerfully. Good. Then you and Christian will need to be down to the car by 5 o'clock and watch in it near the driveway. And I'll probably go to Lexi's in the meantime. She's been sitting there alone since this morning. But I hope you realize that it's better not to tell her anything, Annie said. Of course I understand, Ellen replied and walked towards the exit. Leaving the driveway, she headed toward Lexi's house. Ellen was filled with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, it was very important and exciting for her to see this through for Lexi's sake. but on the other hand, she was very worried about Annie. At first glance, this older woman gave the impression of a confident person who was not afraid of even meeting with crooks. However, Annie was by no means young. There were too many things that could go wrong in this plan. 10 minutes later, Ellen was already in place. The TV was back on in the room, and Ellen realized that her mother-in-law had recovered a bit from yesterday. "Lexi, how are you feeling?" Ellen asked thoughtfully. "Good, Ellen, why do you ask? But it seemed to me that you were feeling pretty bad about yesterday." Ellen was surprised by her mother-in-law's question. "You know, I don't remember yesterday very well," Lexi said with the same calmness. "What do you mean you don't remember? What about the condo deal?" "No, I remember that. I'll be living in a boarding house soon, Ellen, finally free of me." Maybe Ellen didn't realize what was going on right away. Her mother-in-law had never had a blackout before, not even after a stroke. "You're not dizzy? Is your coordination okay?" "I'm telling you, I'm fine." Ellen went into the kitchen, closed the door tightly, and dialed the number of her mother-in-law's friend. "Hello, Annie. There's something wrong with Lexi. She doesn't remember much about yesterday. It's just bits and pieces. She's just glad she got a place at the boarding school." "What? I thought so," Annie exclaimed. "Lexi couldn't just give up like that. They're putting something in, but it's all the more interesting. How is she feeling overall?" "She seems fine otherwise." "Well, that means I won't die. Don't worry, Ellen, it'll work out." Annie hung up. Ellen became even more worried. Now, the danger to the elderly woman's health was not a perceived danger, but more than real. Ellen could not leave this situation so easily, and, after a little thought, dialed the number of Investigator Swan. "Comrade Captain, hello. It's Ellen. We met this morning." "Yes, you remembered something." The captain recognized Ellen immediately. "No, there's a detail that's come up. Basically, my mother-in-law has been having memory lapses. I've never seen her do that before. I think she was drugged last night." "Okay, this is interesting. Send her to the clinic for a blood test. I'll make arrangements to get it done quickly. But that's not all. The thing is, my mother-in-law's friend Annie and I have decided to, how shall I put it, increase the evidence base. And today the same organization is coming to her to sign a contract, and the whole process will be captured on camera. Of course, this woman will not sign any contracts." "Are you out of your mind?" Swan interrupted Ellen. "What kind of amateur hour is this? Are you playing detective?" "Comrade Captain, we had no choice. We're running out of time. The apartment will soon be taken away, and because of this you jeopardize the life of another person." The captain was silent for a while. "Okay, all right. What time is this event?" "A member of this organization should be here between 5 and 6. "Damn, that's so soon. I'm out of town right now. There's no way I can make it by 5. I'll try to make it by 6. What's the address?" "Mayakovsky, 35, apartment 12. I wrote it down. "Wait for me. Be careful." "So maybe you'll send someone else to us?" "No, it's impossible." "On what grounds?" "In short, try to delay this process as long as possible." Ellen was a little calmer after that conversation. "Now, Annie, is there any insurance in the form of Investigator Swan?" Ellen looked at the time. The clock read 15. She decided she needed to take Lexi to the lab. If the test results showed that there were some substances in her blood, it would be an ironclad reason for the police to intervene. Without thinking, Ellen hailed a cab and entered the room. "Lexi, remember the district doctor once told about a special blood test for complex diagnosis of anemia?" Ellen decided to latch on to the recent words of the medic who came to her mother-in-law's house. "Of course I remember. It still costs some huge money. I hope you're not going to suggest I get it done?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. But you don't have to pay a lot of money for it. There's a promotion going on right now, free for the elderly." "Until what date is the promotion?" till today. Ellen knew Lexi wouldn't pass up an opportunity for a free test she didn't really need. 5 minutes later, the cab pulled up and Ellen and her mother-in-law headed to the clinic. There was almost no traffic on a weekend day, and in 15 minutes the car was there. Helene took Lexi to the clinic, put her in a chair in the hallway, and went to the front desk. Very quietly, so that her mother-in-law would not hear anything, she asked, "Hello, where to come for a blood test?" "What kind?" strictly asked the girl. Ellen could not think of a wording for different substances. "Are you what?" from the investigator, did not immediately understand the girl. "You should have said so right away. We were warned. Go straight down the hall to room 14. Ellen and Lexi reached the lab. "Hey, why isn't there a line for this attraction?" Unprecedented generosity, wondered the mother-in-law. It's Saturday, the last day, and the elderly do not work, so they all went and did it on weekdays. Ellen found this excuse convincing. Luckily for her, the healthcare worker who took the test was silent, and Lexi, surprisingly, didn't ask any unnecessary questions. After a quick analysis, they went out into the hallway to wait for the results. Literally 10 minutes later, the health worker came out and silently held out a piece of paper to Ellen. "But what is it?" Lexi asked. "I can't see anything without my glasses." Ellen ran her eyes over the incomprehensible numbers. Everything seemed to be normal. Finally, she reached the last line, where it said in bold letters, "Not found." "Yes, everything's perfectly normal," Ellen said. "Come on, I'll call a cab." Ellen didn't know whether to be happy or not. It seemed that now there was no need to worry about her mother-in-law's health or Annie's. But now it was unclear what to pin on these con artists. What to show investigator Swan. Everything depended on today's operation, which was less than an hour and a half away. The cab made it to Lexi's house just as quickly. Ellen took her mother-in-law to the apartment. "I'm going to call Annie and brag," Lexi said proudly as she walked into the room. "Maybe you shouldn't." Ellen hadn't had time to warn Annie about the examination, and calling her mother-in-law might cause some misunderstanding. She just wouldn't be able to make it, since today was the last day. "Yeah, you're right, you should have called sooner. Why do they give such late notice of their events?" Ellen didn't answer that question, but only warned Lexi that she would have to go out again tonight. "Where do you go so often?" "I always stayed at home on weekends. And you run here and there?" her mother-in-law asked incredulously. "Yes, I just have a friend came from New York. We studied together at the Institute, so I show her our city." "Yes, she will be very interested in our city after New York," Lexi commented wryly. "Well, go on, don't worry about me, I'll make my own dinner." Ellen was glad her mother-in-law was in a good mood. After waiting another half hour, she packed up and headed to Annie's house. She and Christian had agreed to meet a little before 5. When she reached the house, Ellen saw that Christian was already sitting in the car. He looked very tense. His mother was about to let the crooks into the apartment. Ellen opened the car door and got into the front seat. "What's up? How's Lexi doing?" "My mom told me you called her," Christian asked excitedly. "She's fine. I took her to forensics. They didn't find anything." Christian breathed a sigh of relief. They sat in silence for a couple of minutes before Helene decided to alert her lawyer. "I called the investigator after all. He said he could probably make it by 6. "What?" "But I asked you, Ellen, would it interfere with the whole operation?" "What was I supposed to do? Was Lexi's life in danger?" "I had to call to arrange the forensics. I didn't know they wouldn't find anything. I warned Annie, too," Ellen said. "Okay, maybe you're right." Christian thought about it. It was already 5 o'clock in the evening. Ellen looked at her cell phone, which was attached to the front of the car. There was a panorama of Annie's living room. The woman was sitting quietly in a chair reading a newspaper. Christian watched the entrance to the driveway carefully. 10 minutes had passed, but no one from the social organization seemed to have gone in there. After waiting another 5 minutes, Ellen decided to break the tense silence. "Christian, tell me, I don't know why I even wanted to ask this question. I guess it's important to me. Did you know my husband, Emmett? Ellen wanted to break the awkward pause and could think of nothing better than to talk to Christian about her husband, who had passed away a year ago. She knew almost nothing about his friends. She had only seen some of his colleagues at work, and that was it. Of course, we were friends when we were kids. Our parents lived next door to us. Yeah, and my mom still lived next door to each other. And then what happened? Why did you stop hanging out? We grew up, we all became so important, so serious. Everyone's busy with business, families. There was no time for friendship. Well, I guess that's what happens to a lot of people. Then I went to work in Los Angeles, and I only came back here once in a while. I didn't have much contact with anyone here except my mom. It took me a while to find out that Emmett was gone. My mom called only 2 days later, so I didn't even have time to fly to the funeral. How long will you be here now? Ellen asked. No, the law firm where I worked there went bankrupt, and I decided to come back here. I've been in private practice here for 6 months now. I thought LA would be boring, but as you can see, Christian grinned. I'm not bored. It just pays less, but it's cheaper to live here, of course. Yes, we're a lot of fun, Ellen said. My mother used to tell me about you sometimes, by the way. What do you say about me? Christian asked interestedly. Helene was also interested. Yes, she did. The amazing thing is that the daughter-in-law not only did not abandon her mother-in-law, but also began to live and take care of her. Especially since I remember Lexi's bossy personality from childhood. No way. She's all alone. I couldn't do anything else. You're right about the temper, of course. It can be tough. But she's done so much for me and Emmett in her time. I'll be grateful to her for the rest of my life. So I try to ignore her barbs and just do my duty. You have a heart of gold? I can't imagine my ex-wife helping my mom if something happened to me. You know, when Emmett was alive, I couldn't imagine living with Lexi either. Ellen smiled. But as you can see, it's okay. It's tolerable. So you shouldn't be talking about your ex-wife. No, it was clear from the beginning. Christian smiled too. He wanted to continue, but he thought it would be inappropriate to discuss his ex-wife with Helene. You can't determine in advance how a person will behave in a difficult situation. If someone had told each of us 3 days ago what we were going to do now, no one would have believed it. But the way life turned out. I would never have believed that I would be trying to catch criminals, Ellen said. Neither would I. We lawyers tend to be a little on the other side. We're not supposed to catch criminals. We're supposed to defend those suspected of crime. The one person I would certainly never doubt is Annie. She'll come to the aid of anyone, anytime. Yeah, Mom's doing great. She's hanging in there. I'm worried about her youthful enthusiasm, of course. But that's what she lives for. I think without adventure, she'd lose interest in life. You must have gone into it? Christian asked. Lawyering, even in criminal cases, is not an adventurous occupation. I might have gone into it, but I'm a much more free in life, replied Helen. I'm more like my dad, I guess. Mom did not immediately accept my choice to become a lawyer. She kept saying, how can I defend criminals? And what did you say to her? I said what any professional lawyer would say. We're not defending criminals, we're defending justice. A man can be wrongly accused of something he didn't do. That's where we come in. But very often criminals are arrested at the scene of the crime. Do you still fight for these cases? For example, would you defend the people in this office who took Lexi's apartment? You're asking very difficult questions, Ellen. Christian replied. I apologize if I said something I shouldn't have. No, it's okay. That's exactly the question I can't answer. Of course, I won't defend these scoundrels. The thing is, I have a personal interest here. After all, these people cheated my dead friend's mom, and they're going to cheat my mom. And when there's a personal interest, we're prohibited by attorney ethics from pursuing this matter. Ellen leaned back in her seat and thought. But not about lawyer ethics, but about Christian. She liked his way of answering questions, his calmness and judgment. She found something in common between Christian and her husband, Emmett. And for a few seconds, Ellen even thought she was beginning to like him. But these reflections were interrupted by Christian himself. Helene, look, he said, and pointed toward the entrance. A young man in a suit and a leather bag is standing by the intercom. I think that's our client. Maybe just a neighbor, Ellen suggested, looking at the broadcast from Annie's apartment. In any case, we'll find out now. A few seconds later, they heard the intercom ringing through the phone. Annie got up from her chair and walked out into the hallway. Hello, I represent the social fund to help the lonely, came a voice. Here is the edited text with names and cities replaced. Our employee told us all about you, came a voice from the microphone of the phone in the closet. It was hard to hear separate phrases in the hallway, but they were audible in the car. Annie did not delay the swindler at the door and immediately invited him into the room. And I've been waiting for you for 20 minutes. I've been on my nerves. The woman again entered the image of an infirm, restless old woman. But I'm sorry, I have a lot of things to do. I have to go around and help everyone. The employee explained his delay in a kind tone. I understand. I guess you have a lot of people like me? Quite a lot. But you can't create a place for everyone in the boarding house, you know. So you're very lucky. I don't know why I'm so lucky, Annie pretended to be confused. Oh, that's right. I didn't even offer you tea, but I will refuse to despair. Annie went into the kitchen. Christian and Helene watched the swindler closely. A simple-looking young man with glasses and slicked-back hair began to look around the apartment. At one point, he came close to a cabinet, probably to evaluate a set. Ellen already thought that now he would notice the cell phone with the camera on, and that would be the end of the operation. But no. After looking at the set for 10 seconds, the young man switched his gaze to something else. Here I am. Annie came into the room with a tray with a teapot and 2 cups. What a thoughtful hostess you are. It's a lot of work, the man muttered. But why not take care of such an expensive guest? What did you say your name was? I'm Carl, junior assistant manager. Why are you such a mature man? Just a junior assistant, Annie began to implement her plan to psychologically pressure the con artist. Why not? I'm still a young man. Is that what you think? Youth is a moment, you know. Before you know it, you're old. So you have to work harder. That's what I'm doing. The con man's tone became less kind. Let's get down to business. I need your passport. Here I've prepared everything as you asked. Annie pointed to the table where the passport was lying. Have a seat, so we'll fill it out, she invited. The man sat down in the chair, took out some papers, and began to leaf through the passport. Uh-huh. Annie Swan, so she's the one. And you, Carl, why are you standing there? You want to check my martial law? Oh, come on. Why would I want to check your marital status? Carl tried to smooth things over. Most likely, the man wanted to get some information about the elderly woman's relatives. And why did you look through it then? Annie kept up with Carl. I was looking for a residential address. I needed an exact address. So you could have just asked me what you were looking for. What? I don't know my address. I'll tell you what, Annie was beginning to talk professionally to the con man. The camera poorly conveyed the expression on Carl's face, but from his gestures it was clear that he was tired of what was happening. Annie, I'm begging you, don't give me a hard time. This is an important document, by the way. I'll take a look at it. The woman snatched the sheet out of Carl's hands. Wow, a deed of gift. I'm giving you this apartment as a gift. Please don't rush things. The man took the document back. It's the right thing to do. Don't worry, you won't have to wait for the deal to be finalized. And in 2 weeks, you'll already be in the boarding house. Oh, but very clever. Only I heard on TV that they can register a sale in 9 days now. You should watch less TV. The man was very annoyed. Why are you yelling at me? Grandma's old. She doesn't understand everything at once. I'm just filling out some very important documents, you know. And here you are with your unnecessary comments. So where are the documents for the apartment? You know, like the registry or the certificate, Annie persisted. Isabel told me I only need a passport. Do you think we're going to get an apartment without her papers? She probably just forgot to tell you. I don't know where those documents are. Ellen was distracted by the phone ringing. It was Investigator Swan. She took the call with a trembling finger. Yeah, she's here. Oh, great. There's a red Opel in the driveway. You see it? Yes, please get in. Helene dialed the phone and spoke to Christian. The investigator will be with us in a moment. A couple minutes later, the back door of the car opened and Swan got in. What's going on here? He asked angrily. We're watching the apartment, Ellen pointed to the camera feed. Wait a minute. I think the best part is coming up. In the apartment, meanwhile, the man was emotionally explaining what the documents for the apartment looked like. After 5 minutes of explanation, Annie gave up. I remember, they're in the other room. Now, Carl, wait, I'll get them all for you. Annie stood up and leisurely shuffled into the other room. The man glanced at her, then took a dark vial out of his bag, opened it, and dribbled a few drops into the woman's cup. Christian and Ellen didn't immediately realize they had to run to save Annie, but the investigator reacted instantly. Okay, let's go quickly. All three of them got out of the car and ran to the entrance. Christian opened the front door with his key, and then the apartment. Everybody stay where you are, nobody move. Swan shouted, and with a deft move he knocked the con artist to the ground. All right, don't touch the cup or the vial with your hands. We're going to get some experts down here to look into this. The investigator handcuffed Carl and reported the incident by phone to the department. Mom, did you drink tea from this cup? Christian asked worriedly. No, of course not. I knew right away that the bastard wanted to take advantage of my absence. So it was a setup, whispered the man lying on the floor. It's all right, you can't prove anything. Of course we won't. Christian took the phone out of the set and stopped the recording. Yes, we can. Comrade investigator, please include the recording from this phone in the case file. Swan took the phone. 10 minutes later, a task force was already on the scene. The swindlers were taken to the department. The expert put the cup and the vial back in his briefcase. The officers briefly interviewed all the witnesses of the incident. They acted quickly. Apparently, there were a lot of calls today. After the team left, Investigator Swan decided to stay in the apartment and interview everyone in detail himself. Annie and Ellen sat in the chairs. Christian had brought chairs from the kitchen for himself and the investigator, but Swan wouldn't sit down. First, he watched the camera footage in snippets. Then he went to the window, thought, and turned to those seated. What is it, citizens, detectives? Let me ask you a few questions. The investigator looked each one over carefully and stopped on Christian. Was your idea with the telephone? Yes, Christian answered and lowered his eyes. He probably thought that the investigator would start lecturing him about the illegality of secret surveillance. Original. Swan complimented Christian. For the first time in my career, I'm proud of the bar. They can't get away with that kind of evidence. Next, he turned his gaze to Annie. You? How did you even decide to do this? Is it boring to sit idle, comrade captain? Annie answered calmly. And the fact that they used some substances, I realized from the very beginning. You're a very brave woman, Swan said in a steady voice. After a moment's silence, he continued with a puzzled expression. I just cannot understand how, if they use such crude methods, they could not catch them neither in our department nor in other cities. After all, dealing with apartments is one thing. Poisoning the elderly with some unknown crap is another. I think I know what it is, Ellen said timidly. They haven't used such crude methods before. I don't understand why they suddenly decided to use poison in their last two scams, Swan asked. The thing is, first of all, it's not poison, but some kind of sedative that impairs attention and memory. And secondly, I think they had this vial with them on every deal just in case, like a plan B. It's just that before that they came across quiet, naive old ladies who were really lonely and unhappy, and were happy for any opportunity to provide themselves a decent old age and help their distant relatives. It was enough to talk to them, to convince them to give the apartment. Therefore, the swindlers did not need to put anything in the tea. Everything happened by itself, but here, they ran into an elderly woman first. She must have started questioning and sarcastic behavior from the doorstep. I don't know how she let them in the first place. I think the con artist used a psychological trick, interrupted the girl investigator. It is unlikely that they began to bully her from the doorstep. Did they say anything about the apartment? About charity, aid, social, state program? But that is, they began to ride on the ears, and when they were already in the apartment, they got down to business. Well, maybe, agreed the girl. So they could not cope with the manifestations of the character of an elderly woman for a long time. First, they invented this unfortunate receipt. Apparently, it didn't help. Then the swindlers remembered about the presence of Plan B and somewhere poured the contents of the vial to put this woman's guard down. The actress, with the help of her talent, was able to repeat this situation. First pressurized the man with questions, hurt him with barbs, and she managed to piss him off, because of which he took up the method already tested on that woman. Bravo. The investigator nodded his head approvingly. It all fits together now. I began to guess something. When you told me about the fact that before the receipt did not appear in these transactions, on the one hand, I realized that it was the result of the persistence of that woman. And on the other hand, I did not believe that it was possible to get rid of the pressure with one piece of paper. The girl hesitated. But wait, if everything was as I just told, then why today at the examination in the blood of that woman did not find anything? I think that question will be answered by the results of the analysis of the contents of the vial. But in my practice, I've seen such substances, which are eliminated from the body in a few hours. The con artist must have used something from this series. The investigator did not have time to finish his sentence. He was interrupted by a phone call. Oh yeah? How come? Who was the interrogator? I see. We'll think about it. Swan's face darkened, and he sat back in his chair. The con man doesn't want to help our investigation, the investigator said. He's talking and acting on his own. He's never heard of any cooperation. How could he not? Annie exclaimed. Why would he say that? He's looking at a much longer sentence. They said he'd get a lighter sentence for cooperating. Yes, I suppose they did, said Swan. He was questioned by a young investigator. His superiors told him to split the cases evenly, so they did. I think these officers had a third contingency plan to act weird. Either they were promised a lot of money, or they were threatened. I don't see any other reason why a small-time con artist would want to incriminate himself. So what do we do now? Ellen asked anxiously. Can't we bring the whole office to justice? It will work. It will work. The investigator reassured her. As far as I understand from your testimony, one of the organizers is a woman named Isabel. If she, of course, gave her real name, she should be detained and arrange a confrontation with the swindler Carl. And on what grounds will you detain her? If this guy is silent? Annie asked. On the basis of your statement. You made an appointment with her first, didn't you? That's grounds. Of course, it's not enough for a trial, but I think she'll tell everything after the first confrontation. Then we'll find all the strings, and we'll be done. The investigator looked at Ellen. And you, I'll ask you to bring your mother-in-law to the station. In principle, it's better for everyone to be there. But it is Lexi who will have to participate in the climax of the confrontation. Isn't it right that the two con men came to her place together? Yes, she told about a young man and a woman. Ellen nodded. Good. So in an hour and a half I expect you at my office. But she doesn't remember much. What am I going to tell her? The main thing she remembers is that it was just the two of them. The details don't matter. Suddenly the investigator's phone rang again. He listened silently, said thank you, and hung up. Well, as I thought, the tea was laced with a sedative, which is quickly eliminated from the body. It's harmless in most cases, the investigator said. He remembered where the phone call had interrupted him. What should I tell my mother-in-law? But think of something. You have a good imagination. All right, time to go to work. We have to find this woman first. The investigator left. Ellen went to Lexi's mother-in-law's house. She had a rough idea of what she was going to say to the old woman. Don't worry, I have some bad news for you, Ellen began. The thing is that yesterday some con artists came to your apartment, but they were caught. So your apartment is not in any danger. What are you talking about? How awful. I let those people into my house. Lexi was upset. There's no need to feel bad about it. You're the reason they were apprehended. Here are partially not lying. There's no telling how many more elderly, lonely people these crooks would have managed to scam if they hadn't run into you. So what do we do now? Nothing. Everything will stay the same. Except you're going to have to go to the police for a lineup. Lexi was worried at first, but then she calmed down a little. An hour later, Ellen was about to call a cab, but she got a call from Swan. Ellen, the confrontation is canceled today. We haven't been able to find the organizers yet. The office is empty, cleaned out to the last piece of paper, so it's going to have to wait. Ellen warned Lexi not to go anywhere today. Ellen began to worry again. What if the crooks managed to get away? Would the court void the deal? The situation was escalating. First, the employee refused to testify. Now Isabel had run away. Ellen could only hope for the professionalism of law enforcement. The next day, Ellen woke up to a call from the investigator. Everything's fine. She's in custody. She got a bolo on her way out of town. Good thing you got her license plate number. And that she's already been questioned? Yeah, she doesn't know or remember anything either. She refuses to testify. So take your mother-in-law and come down to the station right now. 20 minutes later, Ellen and Lexi were sitting outside the coroner's office. The confrontation had already begun, and they could hear snippets of it in the hallway. So you're saying you don't know this man? The investigator asked questions loudly. And you say that you see this woman for the first time? The con artist refused to answer. Swan tried for another 5 minutes to crack the suspects, but to no avail. Then he went out into the hallway and called Lexi into his office. Citizen Kalin, please tell me, do you recognize these men? Asked the investigator. Yes, of course, Lexi answered. They came to see me 2 days ago, promising me a good old age. Carl and Isabel's faces changed immediately. It was obvious that they realized the failure of all their plans. Thank you, Swan said. Sign here, please. The investigator handed the paper and pen to the older woman. Everyone, please wait, he asked. In the hallway, a pale Lexi. Once again, they sat down in the chairs outside Swan's office. For the first time in the last couple days, Ellen could breathe a sigh of relief. It was finally over. A few minutes later, 2 police officers entered the office and led the criminals out. Ellen, come in. Swan's voice was heard. Ellen entered the office. Lexi remained sitting in the hallway. What's up? Ellen asked anxiously. Did we crack? Yes, great, replied the investigator cheerfully. But I didn't understand why they went to Lexi's place together. They always went everywhere together, Swan explained. The young man did all the dirty work. The woman was just scamming old people for money. They were about to call it quits, probably to another town. But your Annie got in hand and Isabel quickly sent Carl to register her, while she covered her tracks. They caught the con man. Isabel thought she was lucky it wasn't the 2 of them. But it wasn't to be. What scoundrels they were. Ellen was outraged. Yeah, but thanks to you and Lexi, we were able to catch them, Swan summarized. With this evidence, they'll be gone for at least 10 years. Well, thank you notes for you, your mother-in-law, and your fellow lawyers, Swan said. I'll do the paperwork. What about Annie? I think we should do something separate for Annie, Ellen replied. I'll write a report to my superiors about giving her an award and a bonus. After all, she was risking her health. Who knew what was in that vial? So we'll give her the highest honor. Ellen said goodbye to the investigator and walked out into the hallway with Lexi. They went home. The worst was over. As it turned out, all these adventures had a positive effect on Ellen's future relationship with her mother-in-law. Lexi practically stopped pressuring her daughter-in-law and began to communicate with her simply as a good friend.